Her fingers hovered over the crisp paper before her, adorned with the soft glow of her vintage desk lamp. At 30, Marissa Renee Coleman had written countless letters to an unnamed recipient, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she would finally send one. The clock on her wall ticked past midnight as she adjusted her position in the weathered armchair, her favorite spot for writing. Her curly dark brown hair fell in loose spirals around her face, still damp from her evening shower. She caught her reflection in the rain-streaked window, warm brown skin illuminated by the soft lamplight, full lips pressed together in concentration, and eyes that held both determination and uncertainty. "Dear Unknown," she began writing, her handwriting flowing across the page like water. "I don't know who you are, or if you'll ever read these words. Maybe that's what gives me the courage to write them." A sudden gust of wind rattled her window, making her jump. Marissa touched the delicate silver pendant at her neck, a habit she'd developed whenever her anxiety threatened to surface. The pendant had been her grandmother's last gift before passing away, a constant reminder that strength often came wrapped in delicate packages. She glanced at the stack of bills on her coffee table, partially hidden under a worn copy of her favorite novel. 2 jobs, waiting tables at the corner cafe during the day and freelance editing at night, barely kept her afloat. But they allowed her to support her mother's medical expenses while clinging to her dreams of becoming a published author. "Sometimes," she continued writing, "I wonder if dreams are meant to stay just that, dreams, the kind you hold close on rainy nights like this one, when the world feels both impossibly vast and suffocatingly small. I work 2 jobs, and some days, the only thing keeping me going is the thought that somewhere out there someone might understand this feeling." Marissa paused, biting her lower lip as she considered her next words. The habit, one she'd never managed to break, surfaced whenever she felt vulnerable. Outside, lightning illuminated the Blue Ridge Mountains in the distance, their silhouette a reminder of the vastness beyond her small corner of the world. "Do you ever feel like you're standing on the edge of something life-changing, but you can't quite take that first step, like you're caught between who you are and who you could be? I carry these questions with me every day, along with the weight of responsibilities and the lightness of hope." She shifted in her chair, reaching for the cup of chamomile tea that had long since gone cold. Her boho-style dress, a thrift store find she'd lovingly altered, rustled with the movement. The colorful bangles on her wrist clinked softly, each one a small celebration of life's tiny joys, even on the hardest days. "Today, I watched an elderly couple at the cafe where I work. They weren't doing anything extraordinary, just sharing a piece of apple pie, their hands occasionally brushing across the table. But the way they looked at each other, it was like they were still discovering new things to love about one another, even after all these years. It made me wonder, is that kind of love still possible in our fast-paced world? Does someone out there still believe in connections that run deeper than casual swipes and hollow messages?" Thunder rolled overhead as Marissa poured more of herself onto the page. Her words flowed freely now, carrying with them the dreams and fears she rarely voiced aloud. "I have this recurring dream where I'm standing on the old bridge near Riverside Drive. The sun is setting, painting the sky in impossible shades of gold and purple. In the dream, someone stands at the other end of the bridge. I never see their face, but I feel this overwhelming sense of coming home. Isn't it strange how we can miss someone we've never met?" She paused again, running her fingers over the turquoise stone ring on her right hand, another thrift store treasure that seemed to call to her creative spirit. The rain had softened to a gentle patter, like nature itself was listening to her confession. "Maybe I'm just a hopeless romantic, still believing in the power of handwritten letters in a digital age. But there's something about putting pen to paper that feels more honest, more real. Each stroke carries intention. Each word weighs more when you can't simply delete it with a keystroke." Marissa stood, stretching her legs as she walked to the window. The streetlights below created halos in the mist, and a few late-night wanderers hurried past with umbrellas tilted against the wind. She pressed her hand against the cool glass, watching her breath create a small fog circle. "I spend my days serving coffee to strangers, editing other people's stories, and trying to keep my own dreams from slipping away. My mother tells me I work too hard, but she doesn't understand that work is sometimes the only thing that keeps the anxiety at bay. When you're responsible for someone else's well-being, you don't have the luxury of falling apart." Returning to her desk, Marissa picked up her pen for the final paragraph. Her heart raced slightly, knowing that tonight these words would actually reach out into the world, instead of joining the stack of unsent letters in her drawer. "So here I am, writing to you, Whoever you are, wherever you are, maybe you're also awake at this hour, carrying your own weight of dreams and responsibilities. Maybe you understand what it's like to feel both strong and fragile, brave and terrified all at once. Or maybe this letter will simply float away into the universe, joining all the other unspoken words and unfulfilled wishes. She signed the letter with a simple M and added a postscript. If by some miracle this reaches someone who understands, you can find me through P.O. Box 1224, Asheville, NC. The address she'd chosen randomly from the phone book trembled slightly in her unsteady hand as she wrote it on the envelope. Different from her usual P.O. box, this one felt like a fresh start, a new possibility. Standing at her apartment door, letter in hand, Marisa caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her oversized vintage cardigan hung comfortably over her dress, her large hoop earrings catching the light. The woman staring back at her looked both vulnerable and determined, scared and hopeful. "Just breathe," she whispered to herself, touching her grandmother's pendant one last time for courage. The night air hit her face as she stepped outside, the rain having finally ceased. The street was quiet except for the distant sound of jazz from the local bar and the occasional car splashing through puddles. Her boots clicked against the wet pavement as she made her way to the corner mailbox. For a moment, Marisa held the letter against her heart, closing her eyes and making a silent wish. Then, before doubt could take root, she slipped the envelope through the slot. The soft thud it made, as it joined other letters, seemed to echo with possibility. What she couldn't know as she hurried back home through the misty night was that her letter, through a twist of fate and a postal worker's tired eyes, would soon find its way into hands she never imagined. Hands that belonged to someone who, like her, was awake at that very moment, wrestling with his own demons and dreams in the quiet hours of the night. As Marisa climbed the stairs back to her apartment, the old wood creaking beneath her feet, she felt something shift in the universe. Whether it was hope or fear or something in between, she couldn't tell, but something had changed the moment she let those words fly free into the world. Inside her apartment, she curled up in her armchair once more, wrapped in the comfort of her grandmother's old quilt. The rain had started again, softer now, like a lullaby. As she drifted off to sleep, her last thought was of that mysterious figure from her dreams, standing at the other end of the bridge, waiting. Michael Joseph Prescott stood in the darkness of his workshop, surrounded by the familiar scent of sawdust and varnish. Dawn was still hours away, but sleep had become an elusive companion since his father's passing 3 months ago. His calloused hands moved mechanically over a piece of oak, sanding in smooth, steady strokes that matched the rhythm of his breathing. At 36, he cut an impressive figure, 6'2" of quiet strength, his dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, a few strands escaping to frame his face. His blue-grey eyes, inherited from his mother, reflected the dim workshop lights as he worked. The sleeve of his worn flannel shirt was rolled up, revealing forearms marked with the honest wear of his trade. The grandfather clock in the corner, one of his father's last projects, chimed 3 times, its sound echoing through the empty space. Michael paused, running a hand through his beard, a habit that had intensified since taking over Prescott Construction. The weight of responsibility sat heavy on his shoulders, along with the crushing debt his father had left behind. "Just keep moving," he muttered to himself, words that had become his mantra. The unfinished blueprints on his desk caught his eye. Not construction plans, but his own designs, dreams of architectural artistry that he'd had to set aside. In another life, he might have pursued that passion, might have created buildings that were more than just structures. But reality had other plans. Hours later, as morning light began to filter through the workshop's dusty windows, Michael finally headed home. His truck rumbled through the quiet streets of Asheville, past the sleeping storefronts and early morning joggers. The mountain air was crisp with the lingering touch of dawn, and fog hung low over the valley, shrouding the Blue Ridge Mountains in mystery. His house, a modest craftsman-style home he'd inherited along with the business, stood silent and empty. The porch steps creaked under his weight, a sound that used to signal his father's return home. Now it just echoed his solitude. Michael collected his mail mechanically, a habit more than a conscious act. Bills, advertisements, and a letter that seemed out of place. The envelope was simple, but the handwriting caught his attention, flowing and elegant, unlike the stark typeface of utility notices. Inside, he dropped his keys on the kitchen counter and shrugged off his leather jacket. The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows, highlighting the thin layer of dust on surfaces he rarely bothered to clean anymore. His coffee maker gurgled to life, the only morning companion he'd allowed himself since Andrea left 2 years ago. The letter sat on his counter, demanding attention. It wasn't addressed to him, not really. P.O. Box 1224 was printed on the envelope, but somehow it had ended up in his mailbox. He should return it, mark it wrong address, and let it find its intended recipient. Instead, he found himself opening it. The first words caught him off guard. Dear Unknown. Something in those simple words reached past his carefully constructed walls. He told himself he'd stop reading, that this wasn't meant for him, but his eyes kept moving across the page. Each paragraph felt like a confession, raw and honest in a way he'd forgotten people could be. The writer's words about dreams and responsibilities, about feeling both strong and fragile, they resonated with something deep inside him, something he'd buried beneath layers of practicality and obligation. Michael sank into his father's old armchair, the leather worn smooth from years of use. The letter trembled slightly in his hands as he read about the elderly couple sharing apple pie, about dreams of meetings on bridges at sunset. The writer's vulnerability was both frightening and fascinating. His coffee grew cold, forgotten as he read the letter again, and then a third time. The signature, just an M, seemed to pulse with possibility. He found himself wondering about the person behind these words, someone who still believed in the power of handwritten letters, someone who understood the weight of dreams deferred. Standing abruptly, Michael moved to his study, a room he rarely entered anymore. Dust covered the drafting table where he used to sketch his architectural dreams, but in the drawer he knew there was paper, proper writing paper his mother had given him years ago, insisting that some things deserved more than typed words or hasty emails. He sat, pen hovering over the blank page. The last time he'd written a letter was to Andrea, trying to explain why their marriage had fallen apart, but this felt different. This unnamed correspondent had offered their truth to the universe, and something in him needed to respond. Dear M, he began, then stopped. What could he say to this stranger? How could he explain that their words had reached across the void and touched something he thought had died with his father? The pen moved almost of its own accord. I wasn't meant to receive your letter, but maybe, in a world that often feels too calculated and cold, some accidents are meant to happen. Your words about standing on the edge of something life-changing resonated with me. I've been standing on my own edge for so long I've forgotten how to move forward or back. You wrote about dreams and reality, about the weight of responsibilities. I understand that weight. Every morning I walk into a workshop that still echoes with my father's voice, trying to keep alive a legacy that sometimes feels like it's crushing me. Some days, the only thing that keeps me going is the thought that he believed I could do this, even if I'm not sure I believe it myself. That elderly couple you described, they reminded me of my parents. My father used to look at my mother that way, like she was a mystery he was still trying to solve after 30 years together. I used to think I'd find that kind of love. Now, most days I'm too busy trying to keep his business afloat to think about what I might be missing. You asked if that kind of love is still possible in our fast-paced world. I don't know. But your letter made me remember what it was like to believe in possibilities. Michael paused, running his hand through his beard again. The morning had grown older, sunlight now streaming fully through the windows. In the distance, he could hear the town coming to life, cars on the street, the faint sound of construction from a nearby site. I have dreams too, he continued writing. They're gathered dust in this study, sketched on papers I haven't looked at in months. Buildings that could be more than just structures, designs that could touch something in people's souls. But dreams don't pay bills or honor promises made to dying fathers. Your words about feeling both strong and fragile, I understand that too. Every day I put on the mask of the capable business owner, the reliable contractor, the son who won't let his father's legacy die. But sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, I stand in my workshop and wonder if I'm just playing a part in someone else's story. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. Maybe because you're a stranger who will never read these words. Maybe because your honesty deserves honesty in return. Or maybe because sometimes we need to speak our truth to the universe, even if no one is listening. He signed the letter simply, J. After sealing the envelope, Michael held it for a long moment. The rational part of his mind told him this was foolish. He didn't even know if the P.O. box belonged to the letter writer, but something stronger than reason made him reach for his keys. The morning air had warmed as he walked to the post office, letter tucked safely in his jacket pocket. People passed him on the street, morning commuters, teenagers heading to school, tourists already exploring the town. None of them knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. Michael Joseph Prescott, taking a step away from the edge of safety. At the post office, he hesitated one final time before sliding the letter into the mail slot. The soft sound it made falling into the box seemed to echo with finality, or perhaps it was possibility. Walking back to his truck, Michael felt different, not lighter exactly, but more aware. Aware of the morning sun on his face, of the mountain air filling his lungs, of the possibility that somewhere in this town, someone might understand. The lunch rush at Corner Cafe had finally subsided, leaving Marissa with a moment to catch her breath. She leaned against the counter, absently adjusting her colorful head wrap, a splash of yellows and oranges that brightened the otherwise mundane Tuesday afternoon. Her feet ached in her comfortable but well-worn boots, a reminder of the 6 hours she'd spent moving between tables with practiced grace. "Marissa, honey, you've got that look again," Ruby, the 60-something cafe owner, called from behind the coffee machine. "Like you're writing stories in your head instead of focusing on refills." Marissa smiled, grateful for Ruby's motherly concern. "Just thinking about my mum's doctor's appointment tomorrow," she lied. The truth was, she'd been thinking about the letter she'd sent 5 days ago. Each morning she'd checked her P.O. box, trying to convince herself she wasn't really expecting a response. "Go on and take your break," Ruby insisted, her silver hair catching the afternoon sunlight. "I can handle things for 30 minutes. Outside, the April air was warm with hints of approaching summer. Marissa's favorite bench in Pack Square Park welcomed her like an old friend. She unwrapped her sandwich, saved from the morning's prep work, and pulled out her worn notebook, its pages filled with story fragments and random thoughts. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Don't forget to pick up my prescription after work." Marissa touched her grandmother's pendant, a gesture that always centered her. Her mother's multiple sclerosis had been stable lately, but the medication costs were a constant worry. After finishing half her sandwich, she decided to check the P.O. box before returning to work. It was a detour she'd been making twice daily, each time telling herself it would be the last. The post office was quiet, the afternoon lull setting in. Her key turned in box 1224 and her heart stopped. There was a letter. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out. The handwriting was strong but elegant, nothing like what she'd imagined, though truthfully she hadn't allowed herself to imagine anything at all. Finding a secluded corner of the park, Marissa sat beneath an old oak tree. The envelope opened easily under her fingers, and as she unfolded the letter, her breath caught at the first words, "Dear M." Someone had answered. Someone had read her words, felt them, and reached back across the void. Each paragraph made her heart beat faster. This stranger, this J, understood. They knew about the weight of responsibilities, about dreams gathering dust, about the mask worn for others' benefit. Their words about their father's workshop and architectural dreams painted pictures in her mind so vivid she could almost smell the sawdust. "Marissa, your break ended 15 minutes ago." She jumped at Ruby's voice, nearly dropping the letter. Ruby stood a few feet away, concern evident in her lined face. "I'm so sorry," Marissa stammered, quickly folding the letter and tucking it into her apron pocket. "I lost track of time." Ruby's expression softened. "Must be some letter to make you forget about work. I haven't seen you this flustered since that publishing house requested your manuscript last year." Marissa felt heat rise to her cheeks. "It's nothing, just—" But how could she explain this connection to words written by a stranger, this feeling that somehow in this vast world someone understood her heart's whispers? The rest of her shift passed in a blur of coffee orders and casual conversations with regulars. The letter seemed to burn in her pocket, demanding attention. Every free moment her mind wandered to those words about elderly couples and dusty dreams. Finally, after her shift ended and she'd picked up her mother's prescription, Marissa found herself in her apartment. The setting sun painted her walls in shades of amber, and she could hear the distant sound of street musicians in the tourist district. She changed into her favorite comfort clothes, soft leggings and an oversized vintage sweater that slipped off one shoulder. Her curls, freed from their wrap, fell around her face as she settled into her writing chair. Fresh paper waited on her desk, but the words wouldn't come easily this time. How did you respond to someone who had seen into your soul through a misdirected letter? After 3 false starts, she began, "Dear Jay, your letter found me today, and with it, a reminder that sometimes the universe has plans we can't understand. You weren't meant to receive my words, yet somehow they found the exact person who would understand them. You wrote about standing on edges, about the weight of legacies and promises. I want to tell you something. Your father's workshop may echo with his voice, but I believe it's also waiting to hear yours. Dreams that gather dust don't die. They wait. They wait for the moment when we're ready to brush them off and hold them to the light again. Today at the cafe where I work, I watched a young man spending his lunch break sketching buildings on napkins. He reminded me of you, of the architect you described in your letter. He had that same look I imagine you must have when you think about your designs, like he was seeing something more than what was in front of him, something beautiful trying to break free into the world. You asked why you were telling me all those things. I think sometimes we need to speak our truth to a stranger because they have no expectations, no history of who we're supposed to be. They can see us purely through our words, our hopes, our fears. I understand about masks. Every morning I put on mine, the capable daughter, the reliable waitress, the aspiring writer who hasn't given up. But your letter made me wonder, what if our masks aren't hiding us, but protecting something precious until it's strong enough to face the world? The elderly couple I wrote about came back to the cafe today. He had a handkerchief ready when she sneezed, and she automatically picked the tomatoes off his sandwich because she remembered he doesn't like them. It was such a small thing, but it made me think about what you said about your parents, about love that keeps discovering new mysteries. Maybe that kind of love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. Maybe it's built in these tiny observations, these small acts of knowing someone so well that caring for them becomes as natural as breathing. You signed your letter J, and now I find myself looking at every customer whose name might begin with that letter, wondering if you're the one who wrote these words that have touched me so deeply, but perhaps it's better not knowing. Perhaps there's magic in this connection that exists purely in ink and paper, in thoughts and dreams shared across the darkness. I have so many questions I want to ask you about your architectural dreams. What kind of buildings do you imagine? What stories do you want them to tell? About your workshop, does the sawdust really smell like possibilities? About your heart, does it feel lighter, having shared its burden with a stranger? But maybe questions aren't what we need right now. Maybe what we need is just this. Two souls recognizing each other's struggles, reaching out across the void to say, I understand, you're not alone. Still, if you want to write back, know that your words have found a safe harbor here. Know that someone reads them, feels them, holds them carefully like the precious things they are. With hope, M. Marissa read over her words once, twice, then quickly sealed the envelope before doubt could creep in. This time her walk to the mailbox felt different, not desperate or anxious, but purposeful, as if she were taking part in something larger than herself, a conversation that somehow felt both deeply personal and universally significant. The letter slipped from her fingers into the box, and Marissa stood for a moment in the gentle evening air. Around her, Asheville was coming alive with its nighttime energy, music spilling from bars, locals and tourists mingling on the sidewalks, the mountains standing silent guard over it all. She touched her grandmother's pendant one last time before turning toward home. Tomorrow she would help her mother with her therapy exercises, serve coffee to strangers, and edit someone else's stories. But tonight, she had done something brave. Tonight she had reached back across the darkness and said, I hear you, I see you, you're not alone. And somewhere in this city, she hoped, a man with sawdust on his clothes and dreams in his heart would receive her words and know they were true. The bank statement lay open on Michael's desk like an accusation. The numbers hadn't improved since last month, and the weight of Prescott Construction's debt seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. He ran his hands through his loose hair, which had fallen from its usual bun during hours of poring over accounts. Mr. Prescott? His secretary's voice crackled through the intercom. The client from the Highland Grove project is here for the meeting. Michael straightened, quickly securing his hair back and adjusting his collar. Send them in, Nancy. He stood, his impressive height emphasized by the morning light streaming through the office windows. The meeting went as expected, another wealthy client wanting luxury features on a budget timeline. As he walked them through material options and construction schedules, Michael felt the familiar disconnect between what he was doing and what he'd once dreamed of creating. We'll need the blueprints by next week, the client said, shaking his hand. My wife insists on everything being exactly like the houses in those magazines she reads. After they left, Michael escaped to the workshop behind the office. The space had always been his sanctuary, but lately it felt more like a refuge. The scent of fresh cedar from his latest project filled the air as he ran his hands over the smooth wood. You should have seen this coming, son, he could almost hear his father saying. Construction isn't about art. It's about giving people what they want. The afternoon mail delivery provided a welcome interruption. Among the usual business correspondence, he spotted it, an envelope with now familiar handwriting. His heart rate quickened as he closed the workshop door, ensuring privacy. The letter was longer this time, and Michael found himself sinking onto his workbench, completely absorbed in Em's words. Her description of the young man sketching buildings on napkins hit particularly close to home. He glanced at his own napkin sketches, hastily hidden beneath construction orders. When his phone rang, he almost ignored it, but the caller ID showed Liam Kennedy, his father's oldest friend and the bank manager handling their loans. "Michael," Liam's voice was grave, "we need to talk about the payment schedule. I know we're behind, Liam, but it's not just that. Your father's last project, that custom house on Riverside, the new owners are claiming there are structural issues. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. That house had been his father's final achievement, completed just weeks before his death. That's impossible. Dad supervised every detail. They're bringing in inspectors next week. Michael, if they find anything serious..." The implications hung heavy in the air. A lawsuit could destroy everything his father had built. After hanging up, Michael stared at Em's letter, still open on his workbench. Her words about masks and protecting something precious until it's strong enough struck him differently now. Was he protecting his father's legacy, or hiding behind it? He pulled out his drafting paper, the expensive kind he saved for special projects. His hand moved almost of its own accord. "Dear Em, your letter found me on a day when I needed reminding that there's more to life than balance sheets and client demands. You asked about my architectural dreams. What kind of buildings I imagine. The truth is, I dream of spaces that tell stories. Not the cookie-cutter luxury homes my clients want, but places that grow from the land itself, that carry meaning in every beam and archway. When I was younger, I used to climb the mountains around Asheville, finding spots where the view took my breath away. I'd sit there for hours sketching buildings that seemed to grow from the rock itself, structures that honored both the landscape and the people who would live in them. My father called them impractical. Maybe he was right. You wrote about the young man sketching buildings on napkins, and I smiled because my desk drawers are full of such sketches. Dreams scribbled in margins, between material orders and cost estimates. Sometimes I wonder if that's all there'll ever be, margins in someone else's story. Today I received news that could change everything. A house my father built, his last project before he died, might have problems, serious ones. The kind that could bring down not just a building but an entire legacy. I should be focused on finding solutions, calling lawyers, preparing for the worst. Instead, I'm sitting in my workshop, writing to a stranger about dreams and napkin sketches. But maybe that's exactly what I need to be doing. You wrote about masks protecting something precious until it's strong enough to face the world. I've been wearing my father's mask for so long, trying to be the son who could carry his legacy forward. What if that's not who I'm meant to be? The sawdust you asked about, yes, it smells like possibilities, but it also smells like history, like decades of my father and grandfather shaping wood into what other people wanted. I wonder sometimes what they would have built if they'd listened to their own dreams instead. There's this spot on the old bridge near Riverside Drive where I sometimes stop on my way home. The view of the mountains at sunset makes me think of those sketches from my younger days. Sometimes I imagine building something there, not on the bridge itself, but inspired by that view. A structure that would make people stop and look up, remember that there's beauty in the world beyond their daily struggles. You asked if my heart feels lighter, having shared its burden with a stranger. The truth is, it feels both lighter and heavier. Lighter because your words give me permission to acknowledge these dreams I've kept hidden. Heavier because now I have to decide what to do with them. The elderly couple you described, with their handkerchiefs and removed tomatoes, they remind me that love isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes it's about small choices, made day after day. Maybe that's true for dreams too. Maybe they're built not in giant leaps, but in tiny decisions to stay true to ourselves. I find myself wondering about you too. What stories are you writing when you're not serving coffee? What dreams are you protecting behind your own mask? Does your heart race a little when you see an envelope with unfamiliar handwriting, the way mine did today? There's something freeing about writing to someone who doesn't know my name, who can't see the expectations I carry. With you, I'm not Michael Prescott, struggling to save his father's company. I'm just Jay, a man who dreams of building beautiful things. If you're still willing to be part of this conversation, know that your letters have become a bright spot in days that often feel overwhelming. Know that somewhere in this city, A man with sawdust on his clothes and too many responsibilities on his shoulders stops what he's doing every time he sees your handwriting. Until next time, Jay. Michael read over the letter once more before sealing it. Outside his workshop, he could hear Nancy locking up the office for the day. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Instead of heading straight to the post office, he drove to the bridge near Riverside Drive. Standing there, watching the last light fade from the sky, he made a decision. Tomorrow, he would face whatever challenges came with the house inspection. But tonight, he would send these words out into the world, a small act of faith in something larger than himself. The letter slipped from his fingers into the mailbox, carrying with it both confession and hope. As he walked back to his truck, Michael realized he felt different. Not lighter exactly, but more authentic. As if by sharing his truth with Em, he was finally beginning to share it with himself. "Ms. Coleman," the nurse's voice pulled Marissa from her thoughts. "Your mother's ready to go home now." Marissa stood from the uncomfortable hospital chair, adjusting her flowing maxi dress and gathering her mother's belongings. The emergency room visit hadn't been planned. Her mother's sudden dizzy spell during physical therapy had sent them rushing here instead of going to their regular appointment. "Baby, you don't have to look so worried," her mother Diane said as Marissa helped her into the wheelchair. "The doctor said it was just a reaction to the new medication." Marissa tried to smile, but her mind was already calculating the cost of this unexpected visit. Even with insurance, the co-pays were adding up. The letter she'd received from Jay yesterday remained unread in her bag, a luxury she hadn't had time to indulge in. Outside, the afternoon heat wrapped around them like a heavy blanket. Marissa carefully helped her mother into their old Honda, making sure she was comfortable before loading the wheelchair into the trunk. "You missed work again because of me," Diane said softly as they drove home. "Ruby's going to get tired of making exceptions." "Ruby understands," Marissa assured her, though she knew her mother was right. 3 missed shifts this month alone. Besides, I got some editing done while we were waiting. What she didn't mention was the half-finished letter to Jay crumpled in her bag, started during those long hours in the emergency room. How could she explain to her mother that writing to a stranger had become as essential as breathing? At home, after settling her mother in for a nap, Marissa finally allowed herself a moment of peace. She sat at her small desk by the window, the afternoon light filtering through her sheer curtains. Her fingers traced the edges of Jay's unopened letter as she took in the sight of his now familiar handwriting. As she read, her world shifted. His words about the troubled house project, about dreams sketched in margins, about standing on that bridge, they painted pictures in her mind so vivid she could almost see him there. When she reached the part about his father's legacy, tears pricked at her eyes. She understood all too well the weight of expectations, the fear of letting down those we love. Taking out fresh paper, she began to write, "Dear Jay, I'm writing this letter in the quiet aftermath of a day that reminded me how quickly our carefully planned lives can unravel. My mother had a health scare today, nothing severe, thank goodness, but enough to remind me of life's fragility. As I sat in the emergency room, watching her sleep in that narrow hospital bed, I thought about what you wrote regarding masks and legacies. You asked about my stories, about the dreams I protect behind my own mask. The truth is, I've been working on a novel for the past 2 years, stealing moments between coffee orders and hospital visits. It's about a daughter watching her strong, vibrant mother slowly fade away and learning that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is ask for help. Art imitating life, I suppose, though I never intended it that way. Your words about the house your father built struck a chord with me. We all inherit legacies, don't we? Some are made of bricks and mortar, others of expectations and unspoken promises. My mother was a dancer before MS took that away from her. Sometimes I catch her watching old videos of her performances, and I see in her eyes the same look you described, dreams confined to margins, waiting to break free. You mentioned that spot on the bridge near Riverside Drive. I know it well. On days when the weight of responsibility feels too heavy, I often walk there during my lunch break. The view of the mountains reminds me that some things endure, no matter what changes life brings. I wonder if we've ever stood there at the same time, 2 strangers sharing the same moment of peace without knowing it. The news about your father's last project must be terrifying. I can't offer solutions, but I can tell you this. A legacy isn't just what we inherit. It's what we choose to do with that inheritance. Maybe the real test isn't whether you can preserve everything exactly as it was, but whether you can honor its essence while making it your own. You asked about my heart racing when I see your handwriting. Yes, it does. Your letters have become anchors in weeks that often feel like they're spinning out of control. They remind me that somewhere in this city, someone else understands what it's like to live in the space between duty and dreams. There's something I haven't told you, something I've barely admitted to myself. I received an email last week from a small publishing house interested in my manuscript. They want to meet, to discuss possibilities. It's the kind of opportunity I've dreamed of, but the timing couldn't be worse. With my mother's health issues and mounting medical bills, I can't afford to reduce my work hours to focus on writing. Dreams, it seems, don't always arrive when we're ready for them. But your letter about your architectural sketches made me think. You described buildings that grow from the land itself, that carry meaning in every beam. Maybe stories are like that too. Maybe they grow from the soil of our experiences, taking shape whether we're ready or not. The question is, do we have the courage to let them stand? I find myself imagining the buildings you would design if you were free to follow your vision. Would they have spaces for dreamers to gather? Quiet corners where people could write letters to strangers? Windows perfectly placed to catch the sunset over the mountains? The coffee shop where I work is housed in an old building with exposed brick walls and wooden beams that have witnessed decades of stories. Sometimes during quiet moments, I rest my hand against those beams and imagine all the dreams they've sheltered. Is that what you see when you look at buildings? The stories they could tell? You said you're not just Michael Prescott, struggling to save his father's company, but Jay, a man who dreams of building beautiful things. Well, I'm not just a waitress with too many responsibilities. I'm M, a woman who believes that sometimes the most beautiful stories are written in the spaces between what we must do and what we dream of doing. If your heart is heavy with the weight of that house inspection, know that someone is thinking of you, hoping that whatever happens, you'll find a way to build something true to both your father's legacy and your own dreams. With understanding, Emmy. Marissa folded the letter carefully, her fingers lingering on the paper. Through her window, she could hear the distant sound of her mother's television, the familiar theme song of her favorite show, Reality Calling. She slipped the letter into her bag. Tomorrow morning, before her shift at the cafe, she would mail it. For now, she had medications to organize, dinner to prepare, and a manuscript to edit. Standing at her desk, Marissa caught her reflection in the window. The setting sun painted her dark skin in warm gold tones, her curls loose around her face. She touched her grandmother's pendant, drawing strength from its familiar weight. "Keep going," she whispered to herself, the words both a prayer and a promise. Somewhere in this city, a man with sawdust on his clothes and dreams in his heart was doing the same thing, finding the courage to take one more step forward, to build something beautiful from the materials life had given him. And maybe that was enough for now. Two souls reaching across the darkness, reminding each other that even the heaviest dreams could take flight if someone believed in them. The inspectors moved through the riverside house like silent judges, their tablets and measuring tools extending like extra limbs. Michael stood in what had been meant to be the grand foyer, his father's pride evident in every careful detail, the hand-carved banister, the precise angle of the morning light through the custom windows. "Mr. Prescott?" The lead inspector's voice echoed in the empty space. "We'd like you to take a look at something." Following them to the basement, Michael's boots echoed on the concrete floor. His hair was pulled back tight today, his usual worn flannel replaced with a crisp button-down. Professional, controlled, the mask of a capable business owner. Here, the inspector's flashlight beam illuminated a crack in the foundation wall. "And there are similar patterns in the east wing." Michael's stomach tightened. He'd helped pour this foundation himself, remembered his father obsessing over every detail. "How bad?" "We'll need to run more tests, but..." The inspector's hesitation said everything. Back in his truck, Michael sat with the engine off, staring at the house through the windshield. His phone buzzed with messages from Liam at the bank, from the homeowner's lawyer, from contractors waiting for payment on other projects. Instead of answering any of them, he pulled out the letter he'd received that morning. Em's words about legacies and inheritance seemed prophetic now. Her own struggles with her mother's illness and her writing dreams resonated with a new intensity. The drive to his workshop took longer than usual, traffic clogged with tourists enjoying the spring weather. Inside, the familiar scent of wood and varnish usually brought comfort. Today, it felt like his father's ghost watching, waiting to see how his son would handle this crisis. He pulled out his drafting table, the one item he'd insisted on keeping when they'd modernized the office. Fresh paper waited like a blank canvas. "Dear Em, I'm writing this letter from my workshop, surrounded by the ghosts of unfinished projects and the weight of decisions I'm not sure how to make. Today, inspectors confirmed what I feared about my father's last house. The foundation, the very thing that's supposed to hold everything together, is compromised. There's a metaphor in there somewhere, isn't there, about foundations and the things we build our lives upon. You wrote about your mother's dancing, about legacies of expectations and unspoken promises. As I watched those inspectors move through my father's final project today, I couldn't help but think about the foundations we inherit and the cracks we sometimes find in them. Your words about the publishing house opportunity struck me deeply. Isn't it strange how dreams often arrive at the most impossible moments? When I was reading your letter, I remembered something my father once told me. He said, "Son, timing is everything in construction. Pour concrete too early or too late and the whole thing falls apart." I think he meant it as practical advice, but maybe there was more to it. You asked about the buildings I would design if I were free to follow my vision. Today, standing in that compromised house, I found myself sketching in the margins of the inspection report, not fixes for the existing problems, but something entirely new. A house that works with the land instead of fighting it, that acknowledges its own imperfections and makes them part of its beauty. I've been staring at a stack of bills and legal notices for hours, trying to figure out how to save my father's company. But your letter made me ask myself, what if I'm trying to save the wrong thing? What if the real legacy isn't the company name or the contracts, but the love of creation he taught me? The understanding that everything we build, whether it's a house or a life, starts with a single honest line on a blank page. The timing of your manuscript opportunity isn't wrong, Em. Maybe it's exactly right. Maybe these moments when everything seems impossible are exactly when we need to reach for our dreams the hardest. After all, isn't that what you're doing every day? Balancing your mother's care with your writing, your work with your art. You mentioned resting your hand against the old beams in the coffee shop, imagining the dreams they've sheltered. I did something similar today. In the basement of that troubled house, I pressed my palm against the cracked foundation. I wanted to understand what went wrong, but also to feel what might still be right. The bones of the house are still strong, even if the skin is damaged. Maybe that's true for dreams too. They endure, even when the structures we build around them start to fail. You asked if I see the stories buildings could tell. The truth is, I see too many stories sometimes. In every beam and board, every nail and joint, I see choices made, compromises accepted or rejected. Today's inspection report tells a story of hurried decisions and hidden weaknesses, but it also tells a story of ambition, of reaching for something beautiful even if the reach exceeded the grasp. I haven't told anyone else this, but I've started sketching again. Real sketches, not just margin doodles. Late at night, after poring over legal documents and bank statements, I find myself drawing the buildings I see in my dreams. They're different from anything my father would have built. Organic shapes that flow into their surroundings, spaces that feel both sheltered and free. I don't know if they'll ever be more than drawings, but making them helps me breathe. Your story about your mother watching her old dance videos haunts me. I have videos too. My father teaching me how to read blueprints, how to feel the grain of wood, how to see the potential in raw materials. Sometimes I watch them late at night, searching for answers in his confident movements and clear instructions. But maybe the answers aren't in the past. Maybe they're in what we choose to do with our inheritance, as you so wisely suggested. The house inspection isn't finished. There will be more tests, more reports, more decisions to make. The weight of it all feels crushing sometimes. But your letters, they're like windows in a dark room, letting in light and air when I need it most. They remind me that somewhere in this city, someone else is standing in their own workshop of sorts, balancing dreams and duties, finding beauty in the struggle. You signed your last letter with understanding. I want you to know that understanding goes both ways. Your courage in pursuing your writing while caring for your mother, in believing in stories even when reality demands attention, it inspires me to be braver with my own choices. Until next time, JPS. Yes, if I could build anything I wanted, it would definitely have quiet corners for writing letters to strangers, and windows perfectly aligned with the sunset. Some dreams are too beautiful not to share. Michael sealed the letter, his hands slightly dusty from the workshop. Outside, the day was fading, the mountains turning purple against the darkening sky. He thought about Em, imagining her at her desk, perhaps writing her novel or caring for her mother, finding strength in the spaces between obligations. The drive to the post office was automatic now, a journey his heart knew better than his mind. As he slipped the letter into the mailbox, he felt something shift inside him, The foundation might be cracked, but maybe that's what let the light in. Marissa's reflection stared back at her from the publishing house's glass doors. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a flowing rust-colored dress that complemented her skin tone, paired with her grandmother's pendant and simple gold hoops. Her natural curls were styled in a neat updo, professional but true to herself. "You've got this," she whispered, touching the letter from Jay tucked into her portfolio like a talisman. His words about timing and seizing impossible moments had given her the courage to schedule this meeting, to dare to take this step. Inside, Asheville Literary Press occupied a converted Victorian house, its rooms transformed into cozy offices filled with manuscripts and coffee-stained mugs. The receptionist led her to a sunlit conference room where 3 editors waited. Ms. Coleman, the senior editor Lynette Barnes, extended her hand. "We're excited to discuss your manuscript, Dancing in the Dark." Marissa sat, placing her portfolio on the polished table. "Thank you for considering it. Your story about a daughter caring for her mother, a former dancer. It's powerful stuff," Lynette began. "Raw, honest, beautifully observed. We think it has real potential." Marissa's heart soared, but years of cautious hope had taught her to wait for the other shoe to drop. "However," another editor chimed in, "we'd need you to commit to a fairly intense revision schedule. The market for contemporary fiction is competitive. Timing is crucial." There it was. Marissa thought of her mother's medications lined up on the kitchen counter, of Ruby covering her shifts at the cafe, of bills piling up like autumn leaves. How intense are we talking about? 3 months for the first major revision. You'd need to cut back on other commitments. This needs to be your priority. Marissa's fingers found Jay's letter through the portfolio's leather. She thought of his words about foundations and cracks letting in light. "Could I have a day to consider the timeline?" she asked, surprising herself with her steady voice. Back on the street, spring sunshine warmed her face as she walked to her favorite thinking spot, the bridge near Riverside Drive, the same bridge where Jay went to contemplate his own crossroads. Hidden in a quiet corner, she pulled out paper and pen. "Dear Jay, I'm writing this letter from our bridge. Yes, I've started thinking of it as ours, this place where both of us come to face our turning points. I just left a meeting that could change everything, and I find myself understanding your words about foundations and timing in an entirely new way. The publishing house wants my book, the story about mothers and daughters, about dance and loss and love. They want to help me tell it. But they're asking for something that feels impossible. Time. Time I don't have, stretched as I am between my mother's care and paying our bills. Your letter about the cracked foundation arrived just when I needed it most. You wrote about the inspection, about finding problems in what should be solid ground. As I sat in that conference room listening to their offer, I thought about what you said, that maybe the cracks are where the light gets in. This morning, before the meeting, my mother had a good day. She was doing her physical therapy exercises, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of the dancer she used to be. The grace was still there, hidden beneath the limitations of her body. She saw me watching and said something I can't stop thinking about. "Sometimes, baby, the most beautiful dance is the one that works with your constraints instead of fighting them." Farkan, maybe that's what you were trying to say about your architectural dreams, about buildings that work with the land instead of against it. I wonder if that's what we're both learning, in our different ways. How to create beauty, not despite our limitations, but through them. You asked about my courage in pursuing writing while caring for my mother. The truth is, I don't feel courageous. Most days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. But your letters, they're like handholds in a climbing wall, giving me something solid to grip when everything else feels uncertain. The publishers gave me a day to decide. One day to choose between safety and risk, between what is and what could be. I keep thinking about what you said regarding your father's videos, about searching for answers in the past. My mother's dance videos are like that too. But today, watching her find new ways to move, I realized something. Maybe the answer isn't in how she used to dance, but in how she chooses to move now. You wrote about sketching again, about organic shapes that flow into their surroundings. My novel needs that kind of reimagining too. The publishers suggested changes that scared me at first, diving deeper into the hard truths, the messy emotions. But sitting here on our bridge, watching the sun play on the water below, I'm beginning to see how right you were about making our inheritance our own. Here's something I haven't told anyone else. I've started writing a new story, different from anything I've done before. It's about 2 people who never meet but find each other through letters, about dreams shared in ink and paper, about the courage to build something new from the materials life gives us. I wonder if you'd recognize yourself in those pages. The wind is picking up, carrying the scent of spring rain. Soon I'll have to leave this spot, head to the cafe for my afternoon shift, then home to help Mom with her evening routine. But before I go, I want to tell you something. Your words about seeing too many stories in buildings, how every beam and board holds choices made and rejected, they've been echoing in my mind. Because that's exactly how it feels to write, to care for someone you love, to dare to dream bigger than your circumstances. Every word, every choice, every moment of care is another piece of the foundation we're building. The cracks in your father's house may seem like failure, but what if they're really opportunity? An invitation to build something new, something that honors the past while embracing the future. You said my timing isn't wrong. Maybe yours isn't either. I think I know what I'm going to tell the publishers tomorrow. It won't be easy, juggling everything, but then again, when has anything worth building ever been easy? Maybe the real test isn't whether we can avoid the cracks in our foundations, but whether we can find the courage to build something beautiful anyway. Keep sketching your dreams, Jay. Keep seeing the stories in every beam and board. And know that somewhere in this city, someone is writing her own story, finding strength in your words, believing in the possibility of beauty even in the midst of chaos. With hope and courage, MPS. Those quiet corners you'd include in your buildings, the ones meant for writing letters to strangers? I'd like to think they'd have windows facing our bridge, where dreamers could watch the sun set and believe just for a moment that anything is possible. The letter complete, Marissa stood and stretched, her dress catching the late afternoon breeze. Below, the river flowed steadily, constant despite the changes on its banks. Like her mother's love, like Jay's understanding, like the stories that insisted on being told. She had just enough time to mail the letter before her shift at the cafe. As she walked to the post office, her steps felt lighter, more purposeful. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, the publisher's deadline, her mother's needs, bills to be paid. But for now she had this, words sent out into the world like prayers, and the knowledge that somewhere in this city, a man with sawdust on his clothes and dreams in his heart would understand. The final inspection report lay open on Michael's desk, its conclusions devastating in their clarity. Multiple structural issues, design flaws, rushed decisions. His father's last project wasn't just imperfect, it was unsafe. We've received 3 more cancellations, Nancy said softly, placing another stack of papers on his desk. The news about the Riverside house is spreading. Michael nodded, his blue-gray eyes fixed on the mountain view outside his office window. His hair was loose today, falling past his shoulders in dark waves. He hadn't had the energy to tie it back. M's latest letter sat in his jacket pocket, read so many times the creases were starting to wear. Liam from the bank was due in an hour to discuss their options, though options felt like too generous a word for what amounted to different ways of losing everything. But M's words about working with constraints instead of fighting them kept echoing in his mind. Standing at his drafting table, Michael began to sketch, not repairs or modifications, but something entirely new. His hand moved with certainty, creating lines that flowed with the land's natural contours. When Liam arrived, instead of the financial reports he was expecting, Michael showed him these drawings. "I don't understand," Liam said, studying the sketches. "What am I looking at?" "A new direction," Michael replied, pulling out fresh paper to write one more letter before making his final decision. "Dear M, I'm writing this from my office, surrounded by the remnants of my father's dream and the beginnings of something new. Your letter about your mother finding new ways to dance, about working with constraints instead of against them, it arrived exactly when I needed to hear it. The final inspection report came in today. The news is worse than we feared. My father's last house, the one he poured his heart into, has fundamental flaws that can't be patched or hidden. The company is bleeding clients, and the bank is running out of patience. But here's the strange thing. For the first time since this crisis began, I feel truly clear about what needs to be done. Your words about making our inheritance our own have been ringing in my head like a bell. This morning, before dawn, I went back to that house. Not to inspect or assess, but to listen. I stood in the quiet rooms and asked myself what my father had really wanted to build. Not just houses, but homes. Places where people could build their lives, create their stories. The methods might have been flawed, but the dream itself was beautiful. You wrote about your mother saying that the most beautiful dance is the one that works with your constraints. Looking at these rooms, I finally understood what that means. The house's problems can't be fixed by following the old blueprints, but maybe they're not meant to be. I've spent the last 12 hours sketching a completely new design, not a patch job or a compromise, but a total reimagining. A house that works with the hillside instead of fighting it, that turns structural necessities into artistic elements. The cracks in the foundation, they'll become channels for natural lighting, a feature instead of a flaw. The problematic east wing? Transformed into a series of terraced gardens that stabilize the soil naturally. It's nothing like what my father would have built, but maybe that's the point. You wrote about finding strength in limitations, about building something beautiful anyway. That's what I'm proposing to do, not just with this house, but with the entire company. I'm meeting with the bank and the homeowners today to present my plan. Not to save Prescott Construction as it was, but to transform it into something new. A company that specializes in adaptive design, in turning problems into possibilities. It's risky. We'll lose clients who want traditional luxury homes, and the transformation will take everything we have. But I keep thinking about your decision with the publishers, how you're finding ways to pursue your dreams while honoring your responsibilities. You're right. Nothing worth building is ever easy. You mentioned writing a new story about two people connecting through letters. I smiled when I read that, wondering if you know how much your letters have already changed me. They've been like windows in a house I didn't even realize was dark, letting in light and air and possibility. I spent some time on our bridge last night, watching the sunset paint the mountains. A young couple walked past, discussing their dream home. They were talking about solar panels and garden spaces, about rooms that would grow with their family. It struck me that maybe the market isn't just ready for change, it's hungry for it. My father used to say that a house is only as good as its foundation. I always thought he meant the physical foundation, the concrete and steel, but sitting here, surrounded by new designs and possibilities, I wonder if he meant something else. Maybe the true foundation is the courage to build something authentic, something that reflects who we really are. You asked me once what kind of buildings I would design if I were free to follow my vision. I'm about to find out. In a few hours, I'll either have burned my last bridge or built a new one. Either way, I'll know I tried to create something true. The sun is rising over the mountains now, painting the sky in shades of promise. Soon I'll put on my best shirt, tie back my hair and walk into a meeting that will change everything. But before I do, I wanted to share this moment with you, to tell you that your courage in pursuing your writing, in caring for your mother, in daring to build something new, it's helped me find my own. Whether this works or fails spectacularly, I know now that I can't keep building other people's dreams while neglecting my own. Just like you can't keep your stories locked inside while helping others tell theirs. So here's to new foundations, Em, to working with our constraints, to finding beauty in the reconstruction, to believing that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is tear down what isn't working and build something true in its place. With gratitude and hope, JPS. In my new design for the Riverside House, there's a reading nook in the East Wing. It has a window seat overlooking the mountains, perfectly positioned to catch the sunset. I sketched it thinking of you, imagining someone sitting there, writing letters that change lives. Michael sealed the letter, then gathered his designs for the meeting. The morning sun streamed through his office windows, catching the silver threads in his dark hair. In his pocket, M's letter rustled like a promise. Walking to the post office, he passed the corner cafe, wondering if M might be inside, serving coffee and dreaming up stories. The thought made him smile. They were both about to take enormous risks, both about to reshape their inherited dreams into something new. The letter slipped from his fingers into the mailbox. In a few hours he would either save his father's company by transforming it entirely, or lose it trying to build something authentic. Either way, he was finally building his own dream. The hospital corridor seemed endless, its fluorescent lights harsh against Marissa's tired eyes. Her laptop lay open on her knees, the cursor blinking accusingly on a half-finished chapter. The publishing deadline loomed just 2 weeks away, but right now words felt impossible. Her mother's latest MS episode had been severe, a fall that led to complications. 3 days in the ICU had left them both shaken. Marissa's curls were pulled back in a messy bun, her usual vibrant style replaced by comfort clothes that had seen too many hospital chairs. "Miss Coleman," Dr. Richards approached, his expression carefully neutral. "Your mother's stable now, but we need to discuss long-term care options." Long-term care. The words hit like physical blows. Options they couldn't afford, changes they weren't ready for. Marissa nodded mechanically, clutching her grandmother's pendant. In her bag, Jay's latest letter waited, still unopened. She'd received it just before the ambulance came, and somehow reading it had felt like tempting fate. Now, in this quiet moment while her mother slept, she finally broke the seal. His words about transformation, about building something new from the ruins of the old, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. While she'd been pulling hospital night shifts, he'd been revolutionizing his entire company. His courage felt like a lifeline. Finding paper in her bag, she began to write, "Dear Jay, I'm writing this from a hospital room watching my mother sleep. The steady beep of monitors marks time like a metronome, keeping rhythm for a dance we never chose to perform. Your letter about transformation and new foundations found me at a moment when everything familiar seems to be shifting beneath my feet. 3 days ago, my mother fell. The MS, which we've managed to keep at bay for so long, suddenly showed its teeth. I've spent 72 hours in this chair, watching doctors and nurses come and go, trying to write between blood pressure checks and medication adjustments, and wondering if this is the moment when everything changes. You wrote about your decision to transform your father's company, to turn problems into possibilities. God, I wish I had your courage right now. The doctors are talking about long-term care facilities, about professional help we can't afford. My publisher's deadline feels like a distant dream, impossible to reach from this sterile room with its antiseptic air and fluorescent glare. But then I look at my mother. Even now, sedated and weak, her hands move sometimes in her sleep, dancer's hands, still remembering steps and rhythms. I think about what you said regarding the cracks in the foundation letting in light. Maybe this is our crack, our moment of forced transformation. This morning, in the quiet hours before dawn, I opened my laptop and started writing something new. Not my contracted novel about mothers and daughters, but a raw, honest account of this night, of watching someone you love dance with shadows. The words came like a fever, like a confession, like something that needed to be born. I remember you standing in your father's troubled house, listening to what it needed to become. I've been doing the same thing here, listening to the rhythm of my mother's breathing, to the story that's trying to tell itself through us. Maybe, like your redesigned house with its light channels and terraced gardens, our life needs to be reimagined rather than simply repaired. The publisher called yesterday. I told them about the hospital, about needing more time. Instead of the rejection I expected, they asked to see what I've been writing here. Sometimes, my editor said, life gives us a different story than the one we planned to tell. You took an enormous risk with your company, choosing authenticity over tradition. I keep thinking about that as I sit here, watching the sun rise over the hospital parking lot. The novel I promised them was safe, a carefully crafted story about loss and love. But this new thing I'm writing, it's dangerous. It's real. It's full of fear and hope and midnight prayers whispered under fluorescent lights. Remember how I told you about writing a story about two people connecting through letters? Sitting here, reading about your courage in transforming your company, I finally understand what that story wants to be. It's not just about connection, it's about transformation, about how sometimes we need someone else's faith to help us find our own. The doctors say Mom will need intensive therapy, more care than I can provide alone. My first instinct was to drop everything, the book, the publishing contract, all of it, to be the daughter I think I should be. But then I remembered what you wrote about honoring legacies by making them our own. Last night, Mum woke briefly. She looked at my laptop, at the scattered papers around my hospital chair, and said something that broke my heart wide open. I didn't stop dancing so you could stop writing. So here I am, writing to you from this crossroads. My mother needs more care than I can give. My publisher needs a different book than the one I promised. My heart needs, well, that's another story entirely. But for the first time, I'm considering that maybe these aren't obstacles to overcome. Maybe, like your redesigned house, they're opportunities to build something unexpected. I'm going to show the publisher my hospital writings. I'm going to look into part-time care options that will let Mom keep her independence while giving me space to write. I'm going to stop trying to dance steps I've outgrown and start choreographing new ones. Your courage in reimagining your company, in honoring your father's dream by transforming it, it gives me hope. Hope that there's beauty in reconstruction, in working with our constraints, in building something true from the materials life gives us. The sun is rising over the mountains now. From Mom's hospital window, I can just see our bridge in the distance. I imagine you there, presenting your new designs, daring to build something authentic. It makes me brave enough to try the same. With faith in new foundations. MPS. That reading nook you designed, the one with the sunset view, I can see it so clearly. Maybe one day I'll sit there and write a story about how letters can build bridges between hearts, about how sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the deepest cracks. Marissa folded the letter carefully, her fingers lingering on the paper. Outside, the morning shift was arriving, bringing fresh energy to the quiet halls. Her mother stirred, her dancer's hands moving to music only she could hear. Standing, Marissa stretched her stiff muscles. She had just enough time to mail the letter before the morning rounds began. As she walked through the hospital corridors, her steps fell into a new rhythm, not a surrender, but a transformation. Like Jay, with his redesigned house, she was learning to build beauty from what life had given her. The letter slipped from her fingers into the mailbox outside the hospital. Above, the morning sun painted the mountains in shades of possibility. Somewhere in this city, a man with dreams in his heart and sawdust on his clothes was daring to build something new. She could do no less. The autumn breeze carried the scent of change as Marissa stood on their bridge, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. 6 months had passed since her first letter had found its way to Jay. 6 months of dreams shared, courage borrowed, and hearts opened through ink and paper. Her latest book advance check sat in her bag, proof that sometimes taking risks paid off. Dancing Through Shadows, her raw account of those hospital nights with her mother, had resonated with publishers in a way her original manuscript never had. But more importantly, the advance had helped secure a comfortable assisted living apartment where her mother could have both independence and care. The light was fading, casting long shadows across the weathered boards of the bridge. Marissa smoothed her dress, a flowing creation in deep burgundy that made her dark skin glow in the evening light. Her curls danced free in the breeze, and her grandmother's pendant caught the last rays of sun. She pulled out Jay's final letter, received that morning. "Dear Em, meet me on our bridge at sunset. It's time we gave our story more than margins to grow in. Jay." Simple words that made her heart race. After months of sharing their deepest fears and highest hopes through letters, they were finally ready to step out of the shadows of anonymity. The sound of footsteps made her turn. A tall figure approached from the other end of the bridge, his dark hair loose around his shoulders, catching the golden light. Even at a distance, she could see the sawdust on his worn jeans, the quiet strength in his stance. Michael saw her at the same moment. The woman whose words had given him the courage to transform his father's company into something new. Prescott Adaptive Design was now known for turning architectural challenges into innovative solutions. Her letters had been his foundation when everything else was crumbling. They moved toward each other slowly, both aware of the weight of this moment. When they met in the middle of the bridge, the last sunlight illuminated them both, as if nature itself was holding its breath. "Em," he said softly, his blue-gray eyes taking in her face for the first time. "Jay," she replied, a smile playing at her lips. Without words, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a rolled paper. She recognized the type, architectural drawing paper, the expensive kind he'd mentioned in his letters. As he carefully unrolled it, she saw it was a design, not just any design, but one she knew intimately. "The reading nook," she breathed, recognizing the window seat positioned perfectly to catch the sunset, the built-in bookshelves, the organic flow of the space that seemed to embrace both its inhabitants and the view beyond. "It's been approved," he said, his voice warm with emotion. "The whole redesign. The owners loved how it turned their structural problems into features. This nook, I designed it thinking of you, of your words about finding beauty in broken places." Marissa touched the drawing gently, seeing in its lines all the hopes they'd shared through their letters. "Your vision is beautiful," she said, "just like your letters made me believe it would be." "Your novel," he began, then paused, running a hand through his beard, a gesture she'd read about so many times. "I got an advance copy from your publisher. I hope you don't mind. I felt like I'd lived those nights in the hospital with you, through your letters. Reading the book was like watching our correspondence bloom into something bigger than both of us." She stepped closer, drawn by the understanding in his eyes. "You helped me write it, you know. Your courage in transforming your company, in building something true, it gave me the strength to tell the real story, not just the safe one." The last light was fading now, the mountains turning to silhouettes against the darkening sky. In the distance, lights were beginning to twinkle in the city below. "When my father's house started showing cracks," Michael said softly, "I thought it was the end of everything. I never imagined those cracks would lead me to you." Marissa touched her grandmother's pendant, a gesture he recognized from her letters. "Sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the deepest cracks," she quoted his own words back to him. He smiled, reaching out to touch the pendant gently. "Your grandmother's?" "My foundation," she nodded. "Like your father's workshop." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, letting the reality of their presence sink in. All those words shared, all those dreams exchanged, had led to this moment. "There's something else I want to show you," Michael said, pulling out another set of drawings. "I've been working on a design for a new community arts center. The plans include a dance studio with special flooring for people with mobility issues. I thought, maybe your mother might want to consult on it." Tears pricked at Marissa's eyes as she looked at the plans. The space was beautiful, full of light and possibility, designed to make art accessible to everyone. "She'd love that," she whispered. "She's been teaching seated dance classes at the assisted living facility. This could give her purpose again. And there's a writer's studio too," he added softly, "with a view of the mountains and yes, plenty of quiet corners for writing letters to strangers." Marissa laughed, the sound carrying across the water below. "I don't think we're strangers anymore, Jay." "No," he agreed, his hand finding hers. "We're something much better. We're builders." The touch of their hands felt like coming home, like foundations settling into place, like dreams taking solid form. Above them, the first stars were appearing, witnesses to this moment when letters became life. "What happens now?" Marissa asked, though she already knew the answer in her heart. "Now," Michael said, his fingers intertwining with hers, "we build something beautiful together, something true. Something that works with our constraints instead of fighting them," she added, remembering her mother's words about dance. "Exactly." He turned to face her fully, his free hand gently touching her cheek. "Ready to start?" Instead of answering, Marissa rose on her tiptoes and kissed him. It was soft and sure, like ink flowing across paper, like dreams taking flight. When they parted, both were smiling. The bridge had grown dark around them, but neither moved to leave. They stood together, hands clasped, hearts aligned, watching the city lights below. Two souls who had found each other through words, now ready to write their next chapter together. In his pocket, Michael had one more letter, plans for a home he'd designed, one that combined his vision with the warmth he'd felt in Marissa's words. But that could wait. For now, this moment was enough. Standing on their bridge, between letters and dreams, ready to build whatever came next, together. 1 year later, the light streamed through the window seat of the newly completed riverside house, catching the dust motes that danced in the air. Marissa sat in her favorite spot, notebook open on her lap, watching the construction of the community arts center in the distance. Her second novel was coming along well, inspired by the stories of transformation she witnessed every day. "Still writing letters to strangers?" Michael's voice carried from the doorway, warm with affection. He was dressed for work, his dark hair tied back neatly, though a bit of sawdust already clung to his shirt. "Always," she smiled, making room for him on the window seat. "Though these days they're more likely to be thank you notes from Mom's dance students." The arts center had become something neither of them had expected. Diane Coleman's adaptive dance classes were now full every session, attracting people from all over Asheville. Watching her mother teach from her wheelchair, helping others find new ways to move, had inspired Marissa's latest story about reinvention and resilience. "Speaking of letters," Michael said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. It bore the Prescott Adaptive Design logo, now known throughout the region for innovative, accessible architecture. The Winston-Salem project came through. They want us to design a whole complex of adaptive living spaces. Marissa touched her grandmother's pendant, no longer a nervous habit, but a gesture of gratitude. "Your father would be proud, you know. Not just of the company's success, but of how you've made it your own." Michael settled beside her, his arm naturally finding its way around her shoulders. Through the window, they could see the mountains that had witnessed their story unfold. The old bridge where they'd first met was visible in the distance, still catching the morning light. "Ruby asked about the cafe renovation today," Marissa mentioned, leaning into him. The corner cafe was their latest joint project, a redesign that would make the space more accessible while preserving its historic charm. "Did you tell her about the hidden letterboxes we're building into the new booths?" "Not yet. I thought we'd surprise her." Marissa smiled, thinking of the small, beautifully crafted spaces designed to hold dreams and possibilities, waiting to be discovered by future writers and dreamers. The morning sun painted their world in shades of promise. On Marissa's desk lay the early sketches for their own home, a collaboration that merged Michael's architectural vision with her storyteller's heart. Each room was designed to hold both memories and possibilities, a perfect blend of what was and what could be. "Ready to build something new?" Michael asked, echoing the words from that first night on the bridge. Marissa closed her notebook, tucking her pen away. Some stories didn't need to be written down to be true. "With you? Always." They left the reading nook together, stepping out into a day full of possibilities. Behind them, the window seat waited patiently for the next dreamer, the next letter writer, the next story waiting to be told. Some said their own story was like a fairy tale, the misdirected letter, the anonymous correspondence, the sunset meeting on the bridge. But Marissa and Michael knew better. Their story wasn't about fate or fairy tales. It was about courage, the courage to see beauty in broken things, to build something true from what life gives you, to believe that sometimes the most precious dreams are the ones we dare to build together. And somewhere in Asheville, in a quiet corner of a newly renovated house, a letterbox waited for the next dreamer to find it, ready to hold new stories of transformation and hope. Because some traditions, like writing letters to strangers and believing in possibilities, were worth keeping alive. After all, you never knew when a single letter might build a bridge between two hearts. The end. Imagine you received an unexpected letter from a stranger, and that letter completely changed the course of your life, just as it did for Marissa and Michael. What long-held dream would you finally have the courage to pursue? What story would you like to tell that stranger who would somehow understand your heart perfectly? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time. She was hired to deliver a baby to a sterile widower, but couldn't leave after the birth. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She never thought her body would become her salvation, but desperate times call for desperate choices. Yanka Ellis adjusted her worn denim jacket as she stepped off the Greyhound bus in Napa Valley, the California sun hitting her dark skin with a warmth that felt foreign after months of traveling through colder states. Her canvas sneakers touched the pavement with the same cautious rhythm that had carried her through 27 years of life. Always ready to move, never ready to stay. The bus station smelled of diesel and stale coffee, nothing like the magnolia blossoms she remembered from Montgomery. She pulled one of her styled braids between her fingers, a nervous habit that betrayed the confidence she tried to project. The floral headscarf she'd chosen that morning, a small splash of color against her simple outfit, felt suddenly too bright, too hopeful for what lay ahead. Her phone buzzed. A text from the lawyer. "Mr. Moore will meet you at Riverside Diner on Main Street, 2 p.m. sharp." Yanka glanced at her cracked phone screen. 1:47 p.m. Just enough time to find the place and compose herself for the most unusual job interview of her life. The diner sat tucked between a vintage bookstore and a small pharmacy, its red vinyl booths visible through smudged windows. She pushed through the glass door, and a bell chimed overhead, the same sound that had followed her through countless similar establishments across the country. But this time felt different. This time she wasn't just passing through. She spotted him immediately. Cristiano Moore sat in the corner booth, his tall frame somehow making the space look smaller. Even seated, she could tell he was well over 6 feet. His grey eyes lifted from an untouched cup of coffee, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other. He wasn't what she'd expected. No expensive suit, no flashy watch. Just a man in his late 30s wearing a simple button-down shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked by honest work. His dark hair showed traces of silver at the temples, and his beard looked like he'd forgotten to shave for a few days. There was something deliberately unremarkable about his appearance, as if he'd chosen invisibility over impression. "Miss Ellis." His voice carried no trace of California casualness, just measured formality. "Mr. Moore." She slid into the booth across from him, noting how his fingers wrapped around the coffee mug without lifting it, like he needed something to hold on to. The waitress appeared, an older woman with kind eyes and sensible shoes. "What can I get you, honey?" "Just coffee, please." Yanka's Alabama accent emerged slightly thicker than usual, the way it always did when she felt uncertain. They sat in silence until the coffee arrived. Steam rose between them like a barrier neither seemed ready to cross. The lawyer explained the arrangement, Cristiano said finally, his eyes focused somewhere just past her shoulder. "But I want to make sure you understand what you're agreeing to." Janka straightened. She'd had this conversation with herself 100 times during the 3-day bus ride. 9 months. Your baby, $50,000. Her voice stayed steady. Professional. "I understand perfectly." Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or disappointment. "It's not that simple." "It is for me." She took a sip of coffee, grateful for something to do with her hands. "I've done my research, Mr. Moore. I know the risks, the legal aspects, the medical requirements. This isn't my first rodeo with difficult decisions." He leaned back slightly, studying her with those unsettling grey eyes. Why? The question hung between them, more personal than anything they'd discussed through lawyers and paperwork. Janka felt the familiar urge to deflect, to give him the sanitized version she'd prepared. Instead, she found herself being honest. "Because I'm tired of just surviving." The words came out quieter than she'd intended. "And because sometimes helping someone else get what they want is the only way to get what you need." Cristiano's hand moved to his jaw, fingers tracing the line of his beard, a gesture that seemed unconscious, vulnerable. "There's something else," he said, and the tone of his voice made her pulse quicken. "Something the lawyers didn't tell you." And in that moment, Janka realized this arrangement was about to become far more complicated than any contract could contain. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest touch. Janka's coffee cup trembled almost imperceptibly in her hands as she waited for Cristiano to continue. The diner's afternoon crowd buzzed around them, truckers ordering pie, a young mother wiping her toddler's face, an elderly couple sharing a basket of fries, but their corner booth felt isolated from the world. "The pregnancy will be high risk," Cristiano said finally, his grey eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her want to look away. "Not because of anything wrong with you, but because of my genetic history. My son—" He paused, his jaw working silently before he found the words. "My son was born with complications that made his first months difficult." Janka set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "What kind of complications?" "Heart defects. Respiratory issues. He spent more time in the NICU than at home." Cristiano's voice remained steady, but she noticed how his knuckles whitened as he gripped his mug. "The doctors said it was genetic, rare, but possible to pass on." The waitress refilled their cups without being asked, her practiced movements a welcome distraction from the weight settling between them. Janka watched the steam rise from her fresh coffee, buying herself time to process what she'd just heard. "So you're telling me," she said slowly, "that I could be carrying a baby who might not make it, or who might be perfectly healthy?" Cristiano leaned forward slightly, and for the first time since she'd sat down, his composure cracked just enough to reveal something raw underneath. "The chances are about 30% that there could be issues. 70% that everything would be normal." Janka felt that familiar flutter in her chest, the same feeling she'd had at 19 when the police officer told her about her parents' accident, or at 23 when her last landlord gave her 3 days to pack, the feeling of the ground shifting beneath her feet. "And you didn't think to mention this before I traveled 2,000 miles. I wanted to tell you in person." His voice dropped lower, more private. "This isn't just a business transaction for me, Miss Ellis. If something goes wrong—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Janka could hear the ending in the silence that followed. She studied his face, the lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the careful way he held himself as if bracing for impact. "You lost them," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Cristiano's hand moved to his jaw again, that unconscious gesture she was beginning to recognize. "I had a car accident when my son was 2. My wife was driving to pick up his medication." The words came out measured, like he'd practiced saying them without falling apart. They were my whole world. The confession hung between them, heavy and honest. Janka understood now why he'd sought out this arrangement, why he was willing to pay $50,000 to a stranger. It wasn't about wanting a child, it was about needing to fill a void that had swallowed everything else. She thought about the bus ticket in her backpack, about the $300 left in her worn wallet, about the endless succession of small towns and temporary jobs that had defined her adult life. She thought about her parents, gone 8 years now, and how desperately she'd wanted to build something permanent from the ashes of her loss. 70% odds, she repeated, more to herself than to him. "I understand if you want to walk away." Cristiano reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I brought enough cash to cover your bus fare back, plus extra for your time." Janka stared at the envelope, then at his face. In his grey eyes, she saw something she recognized, the particular kind of hope that came after too much grief, fragile and fierce at the same time. She made her decision before she could second-guess herself. "I'll need to meet the doctor first. I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with." She pushed the envelope back across the table. "And I'll need everything in writing, every detail, every risk, every contingency." Something shifted in Cristiano's expression, surprise, maybe, or relief. "Dr. Santos is the best high-risk specialist in Northern California," he said. "She handled my wife's pregnancy. She'll tell you everything you need to know." Yanka nodded, feeling the familiar sensation of stepping off a cliff into uncertain air. But this time, for the first time in years, she wasn't jumping alone. Outside the diner window, the California sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of promise and warning, and neither of them knew that this conversation had just set in motion something that would change both their lives forever. Dr. Elena Maria Santos had the kind of hands that made patients feel safe before she even spoke a word. Yanka noticed them first, steady, graceful fingers that moved with practiced confidence as she flipped through the medical charts. The doctor's office smelled of lavender and antiseptic, a combination that somehow managed to be both clinical and comforting. Diplomas lined the walls alongside family photos, showing a woman who clearly understood the value of both professional excellence and personal warmth. "Please, sit." Dr. Santos gestured to the chairs across from her mahogany desk, her voice carrying the slight musical accent of her Mexican heritage. At 44, she wore her authority lightly, dressed in earth-toned blouses that softened the sterile environment of the medical center. Yanka settled into the chair, hyper-aware of Cristiano's presence beside her. He sat with the same controlled posture she'd observed at the diner, but she caught him glancing at her when he thought she wasn't looking, quick, assessing glances that felt less like scrutiny and more like concern. "Mr. Moore has explained the situation," Dr. Santos began, her dark eyes moving between them with the kind of perceptive attention that missed nothing. "But I want to hear from you, Yanka. What questions do you have?" The use of her first name felt deliberately intimate, a small bridge across the professional distance. Yanka pulled gently at one of her braids, gathering her thoughts. "I need to know what high risk really means. Not the medical terminology, the truth about what I might be facing." Dr. Santos leaned back in her chair, a gesture that somehow made the room feel less formal. "I appreciate directness. It makes my job easier." She opened the top file on her desk. "Cristiano's genetic history indicates a 30% chance of cardiac and respiratory complications. If they occur, they typically manifest in the second trimester. And if they do manifest," Yanka's voice stayed steady, but she felt Cristiano tense beside her. "Bed rest, frequent monitoring, possible hospitalization for the final months." Dr. Santos's tone remained matter-of-fact, but her eyes carried genuine warmth. The baby would likely be born premature and require extended NICU care, but Yanka, she leaned forward slightly. 70% of pregnancies with this genetic marker result in completely healthy babies. Yanka absorbed this information, filing away each detail. "What about me? What are the risks to my health? Higher blood pressure, increased chance of gestational diabetes, possible complications during delivery, all manageable with proper care." Dr. Santos's fingers drummed once against the desk. "But there's something else we need to discuss." The room seemed to hold its breath. "If complications do arise, if this becomes a high-maintenance pregnancy requiring extended bed rest and hospitalization, you'll need someone to advocate for you. Someone who understands your medical history, your preferences, your fears." She looked directly at Cristiano. "The traditional surrogacy arrangement assumes distance between parties. This situation might require closeness." Yanka felt heat rise in her cheeks. What kind of closeness? "Living arrangements that allow for immediate medical response. 24-hour accessibility to both you and emergency care. In my experience with similar cases," Dr. Santos paused, choosing her words carefully, "the most successful outcomes happen when the support system is consistent and present." Cristiano cleared his throat. "I have a guest house on my property. It's private, comfortable, close enough for medical emergencies, far enough for personal space." The offer hung in the air like a question neither of them had expected to face so soon. Yanka imagined herself in some remote guest house, dependent on a man she'd known for exactly one day, carrying a child who might or might not survive. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course." Dr. Santos reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a business card. "But Yanka, I want you to know something. I've been handling high-risk pregnancies for 15 years. I've seen arrangements like this work beautifully when both parties are committed to the process, and I've seen them fail when people try to maintain too much distance." She stood up, signaling the end of the consultation. "The choice is yours, but if you decide to move forward, we'll need to begin prenatal vitamins and monitoring within the week." Outside the medical center, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Yanka and Cristiano walked to his truck, an older Ford F-150 that looked well-maintained but unpretentious, exactly what she was beginning to expect from him. "The guest house," she said, as they reached the vehicle. "What's it like?" Cristiano's hand paused on the door handle. "One bedroom, small kitchen, bathroom with a garden tub, windows facing the vineyard. It's quiet. After 8 years of bus stations, highway motels and shared apartments with strangers, quiet sounded like a foreign concept. "Can I see it?" The words came out before she could stop them. He nodded, and something in his expression shifted. A wall coming down, or maybe a door opening just a crack. As they drove toward his property, Yanka stared out the window at the rolling hills of Napa Valley and wondered if she was about to make the smartest decision of her life, or the most dangerous one she'd ever risked. The vineyard stretched out like a green ocean under the golden hour light, and Yanka felt something inside her chest loosen for the first time in months. Cristiano's property was nothing like she'd imagined. No ostentatious mansion or manicured gardens screaming wealth. Instead, she saw weathered wooden fences, gravel pathways worn smooth by years of use, and a main house that looked like it had grown organically from the landscape itself. The guest house sat about 50 yards away, a small, cottage-like structure with white-painted wood siding and a wraparound porch that begged for a rocking chair. "It's not much," Cristiano said, as he cut the truck's engine, but his voice carried a note of pride he was trying to hide. Yanka stepped out of the cab, her sneakers crunching on the gravel. The air smelled different here, clean with hints of earth and growing things that reminded her vaguely of her grandmother's backyard in Montgomery, a place where she'd felt safe once upon a time. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. The guest house key turned easily in the lock, and the front door opened to reveal exactly what Cristiano had promised. One bedroom, small kitchen, bathroom with a garden tub. But he'd undersold the charm. Hardwood floors worn to a warm honey color, windows that let in streams of late afternoon light, and a kitchen table just big enough for 2 people who might want to share a quiet meal. "The previous owners built it for their daughter when she got married," Cristiano explained, lingering in the doorway, as if uncertain whether he should follow her inside. She wanted to stay close to family, but have her own space. Yanka ran her fingers along the kitchen counter. Real wood, not laminate. In the bedroom, she found a queen-sized bed with a quilt that looked handmade and windows that framed the vineyard like living paintings. "How long since anyone lived here?" she asked. 3 years. He paused. "Since before my wife and son died." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. This wasn't just a guest house, it was a place where he'd once imagined hosting family, friends, celebrations. Now it sat empty, another casualty of his grief. Yanka turned to face him. "Why are you doing this?" "Really?" Cristiano looked out the bedroom window toward the vineyard, his jaw working silently before he answered, "Because I'm tired of everything here being about loss." His voice came out rougher than usual. "I want something to grow again." The honesty in his words hit her unexpectedly hard. She thought about the bus ticket in her backpack, about the motel room she'd paid for in town, about the countless temporary places she'd called home over the past 8 years. "I have conditions," she said finally. "Name them. I keep my own schedule, my own routines. If I want to take the bus to town for groceries or just to think, I do it without checking in." She counted off on her fingers. "No hovering, no treating me like I'm made of glass, and no assumptions about what this arrangement means beyond the contract." Cristiano nodded. "Anything else? If this gets complicated, if you start looking at me like I'm her replacement, or if I start feeling like a prisoner in paradise, we call it off. No questions, no guilt trips." "Fair enough." He pulled a set of keys from his pocket and held them out. House key, spare truck key in case of emergencies, and he hesitated. The main house key, just in case. Their fingers brushed as she took the keys, and for a moment neither of them moved. The touch was brief, accidental, but it sent a jolt of awareness through her that had nothing to do with their business arrangement. I'll need a few days to think it over, she said, stepping back. Of course. But something in his expression suggested he already knew what her answer would be. As the sun began to set, they stood on the guest house porch, the vineyard spread out before them like a promise. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the sound carried across the fields with rural ease. What's that? Janka pointed to a small building near the main house. Old wine cellar. I converted it into a workshop. Cristiano's hands found his pockets. I restore furniture in my spare time. Keeps my hands busy. She could picture him there, sleeves rolled up, focused on bringing something broken back to life. The image felt unexpectedly intimate, like she was glimpsing something private. I should get back to town, she said, though something in her was reluctant to leave. I'll drive you. I can walk. It's only a couple miles. Not in the dark. His tone brooked no argument. Besides, I need to pick up groceries anyway. As they drove back toward town, the silence between them felt different, less guarded, more thoughtful. When they reached the motel, Cristiano parked but didn't turn off the engine. Janka, he said as she reached for the door handle. She turned back to him. Whatever you decide, I want you to know, this isn't about replacing what I lost. It's about building something new. She studied his face in the dashboard light, seeing something there she hadn't noticed before. Vulnerability wrapped in determination. I'll call you tomorrow, she said. But as she walked toward her motel room, Janka already knew that tomorrow would bring a decision that would change everything. Because for the first time in 8 years, she'd found a place that felt like it might become home. 3 days later, Janka stood in the guest house doorway with everything she owned fitting into 2 duffel bags and a worn backpack. It wasn't much. Clothes that had survived countless laundromats, a few books with dog-eared pages, the small sewing kit her mother had given her, and a mason jar filled with buttons she'd collected from every city she'd passed through. 8 years of nomadic life distilled into what she could carry. That's it? Cristiano asked, setting down the bags he'd insisted on carrying from his truck. I travel light. She tried to keep her voice casual, but something about the way he looked at her meager possessions made her feel exposed. Less to lose that way. He nodded slowly, understanding flickering in his grey eyes. I put some basics in the kitchen. Coffee, bread, eggs. There's a grocery store in town, but if you need anything specific, I can take care of myself. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, a defensive reflex honed by years of independence. I know you can. His response was gentle, without judgment. I just meant, you don't have to. The distinction hit her unexpectedly. There was a difference between being able to take care of yourself and having to do it alone. She wasn't sure she remembered how to navigate that difference. Dr. Santos wants to see me next week, she said, changing the subject. Start the monitoring. I'll drive you. I can. Janka, he said her name quietly, and something in his tone made her look at him. Let me help. It's what I'm here for. She wanted to argue, to maintain the walls that had kept her safe for so long. Instead, she found herself nodding. After Cristiano left, she unpacked in silence, placing her few belongings in drawers that felt cavernous compared to the motel rooms and shared spaces she was used to. The closet could hold 10 times her wardrobe. The bathroom had counter space for toiletries she didn't own. That evening, as she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and one of her books, a soft knock interrupted the quiet. Through the window, she could see Cristiano on the porch, holding a plate covered with a kitchen towel. I made too much dinner, he said when she opened the door. Thought you might be hungry. The plate held perfectly grilled chicken, roasted vegetables that looked like they'd come from his own garden, and rice with herbs she couldn't identify. It smelled like comfort, like the kind of meal someone makes when they actually care about nourishment, rather than just filling an empty stomach. You didn't have to. I know. He handed her the plate, their fingers brushing again. This time, neither of them pulled away immediately. But I wanted to. After he left, Janka ate slowly, savoring each bite. The vegetables were sweet and tender, the chicken seasoned with something that reminded her of her grandmother's Sunday dinners. When she finished, she found herself staring at the empty plate, wondering when was the last time someone had cooked for her, just because they wanted to take care of her. The next morning, she woke to find a thermos of coffee on the porch steps, still warm, with a note, in case you like it stronger than what's in the kitchen. The coffee was perfect, dark and rich, exactly how she preferred it. He'd been paying attention during their brief conversations, filing away details she hadn't even realized she'd shared. That afternoon, She ventured to the main house to return the dinner plate. Through the kitchen window, she could see Cristiano at the stove, sleeves rolled up, moving with the easy confidence of someone who actually enjoyed cooking. He looked different here, less guarded, more himself. "Thank you for dinner," she said when he answered her knock. "There's leftover lasagna if you want some." He gestured toward the kitchen. "I'm not good at cooking for one person anymore." The admission was quietly devastating. She could picture him in this kitchen with his wife, probably laughing while they prepared meals together, maybe with their son in a high chair making a mess with his food. Now he cooked elaborate meals for no one, muscle memory of a life that no longer existed. "I could help," she found herself saying. "With the cooking, I mean, if you want." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe gratitude. "You don't have to." "I know," she echoed his words from the night before, "but I want to." That evening, they cooked together in comfortable silence. Janka chopped vegetables while Cristiano seasoned the meat, their movements gradually synchronizing as they shared the small kitchen space. When her hand reached for the salt at the same time as his, when he stepped behind her to reach the upper cabinet, when she passed him ingredients without being asked, each small interaction felt like a dance they were learning together. "You're good at this," he said, watching her julienne carrots with practiced precision. "My grandmother taught me. Said a woman should know how to feed herself and the people she loves." The words slipped out before she could catch them, carrying more weight than she'd intended. "She sounds wise." She was. Janka focused on the carrots, not trusting herself to look at him. "She died when I was 16. Cancer. I'm sorry." The simple words carried genuine sympathy, not the empty platitudes she was used to hearing. He understood loss, understood the way it carved holes in your life that never quite filled in. As they sat down to eat, Janka realized this was the first time in years she'd shared a meal that felt like more than just consuming calories. The food tasted better when eaten across from someone who noticed whether you preferred your vegetables crisp or tender, who refilled your water glass without being asked, who seemed genuinely interested in the small stories you found yourself telling between bites. "This is nice," she said softly, then immediately regretted the admission. "It is," Cristiano agreed, his voice equally quiet. Outside the kitchen window, the vineyard stretched into darkness, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the evening sounds of the countryside, crickets, the rustle of wind through grapevines, the settled breathing of land at rest. For the first time since her parents died, Janka felt something that might have been peace, but peace, she'd learned, was the most dangerous emotion of all, because it made you want to stay. 2 weeks into the pregnancy, Janka woke up at 3 in the morning with her heart racing and her hands trembling. The nausea had started gradually, a queasy feeling that crept in during the afternoon, making her push away half-finished meals. But this was different. This felt like her body was staging a revolution, and she was losing the war. She stumbled to the bathroom, gripping the cool porcelain of the sink, as waves of dizziness washed over her. In the mirror, her reflection looked pale against her dark skin, and the braids she'd been too tired to properly wrap the night before fell in loose tendrils around her face. "Come on," she whispered to herself, the Alabama accent thicker in her exhaustion. "You've handled worse than this." But as another wave of nausea hit, she wasn't so sure. A soft knock on the guest house door made her freeze. Through the window, she could see Cristiano's silhouette on the porch, and she realized she'd left the bathroom light on, a beacon in the pre-dawn darkness that had probably woken him. "Janka, are you okay?" She wanted to call out that she was fine, that he should go back to bed, that she didn't need anyone hovering over her. Instead, she found herself opening the door, grateful for the cool night air on her clammy skin. "I'm fine," she said automatically, but the words came out shaky. Cristiano took one look at her and stepped inside without asking permission. "You're not fine. When did this start?" "Few days ago." She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly too tired to maintain her usual walls. "It's just morning sickness, normal pregnancy stuff." "At 3 in the morning?" She managed a weak smile. "The baby doesn't know how to tell time yet." But Cristiano didn't smile back. He was studying her with the same intense focus she'd seen in Dr. Santos's office, cataloguing details with the precision of someone who'd learned to watch for warning signs. "Have you been eating?" he asked. "Some." The truth was, everything had started tasting wrong. Even her morning coffee, the one bright spot in her daily routine, now made her stomach revolt. Without a word, Cristiano moved to her kitchen, opening cabinets with the easy familiarity of someone who'd stocked them himself. He pulled out crackers, ginger tea and honey, moving with quiet efficiency as he prepared something that smelled soothing rather than overwhelming. "My wife had terrible morning sickness," he said, his back to her as he worked. "Dr. Santos said ginger tea and small, frequent meals. Nothing too strong, nothing too sweet." Janka watched his hands as he prepared the tea. Steady, careful, practiced. Did it help? Sometimes. He turned to face her, and for a moment, the careful distance he usually maintained slipped away. She used to joke that the baby was already making demands like a typical Moor. The past tense hung between them like a bridge neither of them had expected to cross. Janka found herself wanting to ask more about his wife, about the pregnancy, about what it felt like to lose everything you'd built your life around. Instead, she accepted the mug of tea he offered, inhaling the gentle steam. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You don't have to thank me for taking care of you." The words came out more intense than he'd probably intended, and she saw him catch himself, stepping back both physically and emotionally. "I mean, it's part of the arrangement." But they both knew it wasn't just about the arrangement anymore. The tea helped, warm and settling in her stomach. As the nausea receded, Janka became aware of other things, how Cristiano had thrown on jeans and a t-shirt over what were obviously sleep clothes, how his hair stuck up on one side, how he kept glancing at her with barely concealed worry. "You didn't have to get up," she said. "I could have handled this alone." "I know you could have." He sat down across from her at the small table. "But you don't have to anymore." There was that phrase again. The distinction between could and had to. It was becoming a theme between them. This careful negotiation of independence and care. "The light woke you up." "No." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I don't sleep much anyway. I was reading in the kitchen when I saw your light come on." Insomnia. Another casualty of grief, she supposed. She imagined him sitting alone in his kitchen at 3 in the morning, probably drinking coffee that was too strong and reading books that couldn't quite distract him from the quiet of a house meant for a family. "What do you read?" she asked. The question seemed to surprise him. Mostly non-fiction, farming journals, winemaking techniques, sometimes biography. He paused. "What about you?" "Fiction, usually. Romance novels, mostly." She felt heat rise in her cheeks at the admission. People always act like they're trash, but they're not. They're about hope, about believing that two broken people can fix each other. Something flickered across his face. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. "I don't think they're trash," he said quietly. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten at the edges, dawn creeping across the vineyard in shades of purple and gold. Janka realized they'd been sitting here for nearly an hour, talking in the soft voices of people who'd found themselves unexpectedly comfortable with each other. "I should let you get some sleep," Cristiano said, standing. "Will you?" she asked. "Sleep, I mean." He paused at the door, one hand on the frame. "Probably not. But that's not your problem to solve." "Maybe not," she said. "But I'm awake too if you want company." The offer hung between them, more intimate than either of them had intended. Cristiano looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing the wisdom of accepting against the loneliness of declining. "I make good coffee," he said finally. "Even if you can't drink it right now. I'll stick with the tea, but I'd like the company." As they walked together toward the main house in the early morning light, Janka realized something had shifted between them. The careful boundaries they'd established were beginning to blur, replaced by something more honest and infinitely more dangerous. Because caring for someone, really caring, was the first step toward loving them, and love had never been part of their contract. "Your blood pressure is elevated, and you've lost 3 pounds since last week." Dr. Santos's words hung in the examination room like a diagnosis neither Janka nor Cristiano wanted to hear. The ultrasound machine hummed softly in the corner, and Janka could still feel the cool gel on her belly from the scan that had shown their baby, healthy, active, and completely unaware of the complications brewing around it. "What does that mean?" Janka asked, adjusting the paper gown that never seemed to cover enough. "It means we need to take this more seriously." Dr. Santos pulled her chair closer, her earth-toned cardigan a calming presence in the sterile room. "The nausea, the weight loss, the elevated blood pressure, these aren't just normal pregnancy symptoms. Your body is struggling with the hormonal changes." Cristiano leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "What can we do?" "Bed rest. Modified, not complete, yet. But I want Janka to limit her activities, stay hydrated, and eat small meals every 2 hours whether she feels like it or not." Dr. Santos's dark eyes moved between them with the perceptive attention Yanka was beginning to recognize. She'll need someone to monitor her, make sure she's following the restrictions. I can take care of myself, Yanka said automatically, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they sounded hollow. The past few days had been a struggle, dizziness when she stood too quickly, exhaustion that seemed to seep into her bones, nausea that made even water taste wrong. I know you can, Dr. Santos said gently. Joyce, but right now, taking care of yourself means accepting help. This isn't about weakness, Yanka. This is about giving your baby the best chance. The word baby still felt strange on her tongue, still carried the clinical distance of fetus or pregnancy. But when Dr. Santos said it with warmth and certainty, it became something real, something that deserved protection. What about work? Yanka asked. She'd been doing some freelance bookkeeping online, small jobs that helped her feel productive and independent. Light computer work is fine, but no stress, no deadlines that keep you up at night. Dr. Santos made notes in her chart. And I want to see you weekly now instead of bi-weekly. Outside the medical center, Cristiano was unusually quiet as they walked to his truck. The late morning sun felt too bright, too cheerful for the weight of what they'd just heard. You're worried, Yanka said as they drove through downtown Napa. Aren't you? She was, but admitting it felt like giving up some essential part of herself, the part that had survived 8 years of uncertainty by refusing to depend on anyone else's strength. I'll be fine, she said. I just need to adjust my routine. Cristiano pulled into a pharmacy parking lot and turned off the engine. Yanka, look at me. When she met his grey eyes, she saw something there that made her chest tighten. Not pity, but genuine concern, mixed with something deeper, more personal. You don't have to pretend this isn't scary, he said quietly. I'm scared too. The admission hit her unexpectedly hard. She'd been so focused on maintaining her own walls that she hadn't considered how this might be affecting him. Watching another pregnancy carry the same risks that had once threatened his wife and child. I keep thinking about what Dr. Santos said, she found herself saying, about accepting help. I don't know how to do that anymore. Maybe that's something we can figure out together. The word together hung between them, carrying more weight than a simple arrangement between strangers. They sat in the parking lot, watching people go about their ordinary lives, and Yanka realized that somewhere in the past month, this had stopped being ordinary for either of them. That afternoon, Cristiano appeared at the guest house with bags of groceries and a determined expression. What's all this? Yanka asked, watching him unload items onto her kitchen counter. Dr. Santos gave me a list. He held up a piece of paper covered in his careful handwriting. Try foods that might help with the nausea, things that are easy to digest, supplements you need to take. She watched him organize everything with methodical precision, crackers in one cabinet, herbal teas in another, fruits and vegetables that looked like they'd been chosen with scientific care. You don't have to... Yanka. He turned to face her, and she saw that familiar gesture as his hand moved to his jaw. Let me do this. Please. There was something in his voice. Not quite desperation, but close to it. She realized this wasn't just about taking care of her. This was about him needing to feel useful, needed, protective. This was about him trying to save someone he couldn't save before. Okay, she said quietly. Relief flickered across his face. I can cook for both of us, bring meals over, or you could eat at the main house. Whatever feels comfortable. The main house, she heard herself say. If that's okay, it feels less like charity that way. Something warm crossed his expression. It's not charity, it's... He paused, searching for the right word. It's taking care of family. The word family settled between them like a question neither of them was ready to answer. But that evening, as Yanka sat at Cristiano's kitchen table eating soup that tasted like comfort and watching him move around the kitchen with quiet efficiency, it didn't feel like pretending. It felt like something she'd been missing without knowing it. The baby moved today, she said suddenly, her hand moving unconsciously to her still flat stomach. During the ultrasound, Dr. Santos said it was a good sign. Cristiano paused in his dishwashing, his shoulders tensing slightly. Could you feel it? Not yet, but I could see it on the screen. Just a little flutter. She looked down at her hands, made it seem more real somehow. When he turned to face her, his eyes held a mixture of joy and pain that made her heart ache for him. That's good, he said softly. Jas, that's really good. Later, as she walked back to the guest house under a sky full of stars, Yanka realized that for the first time since her parents died, she wasn't just surviving. She was hoping, and hope she was beginning to understand, was the most dangerous thing of all. The nightmares always came at 2:30 in the morning. Janka had been living at the guest house for 6 weeks now, and she'd learned to recognize the sounds from the main house. The sudden silence, where there should have been the gentle rhythm of sleep, followed by footsteps pacing across hardwood floors. Then the soft closing of a door as Cristiano stepped onto his porch. Tonight, as she lay in bed feeling the baby's first tentative movements like butterfly wings against her ribs, she heard it again, the restless walking, the weight of grief moving through rooms that had once held laughter. She should stay in bed, mind her own business, respect the boundaries they'd carefully maintained, even as those boundaries grew thinner each day. Instead, she found herself pulling on her robe and walking across the dewy grass toward the main house. Cristiano sat on his porch steps, elbows on his knees, staring out at the vineyard. He'd thrown on jeans and a t-shirt, but his feet were bare, and his hair stuck up on one side like he'd been running his hands through it. In the moonlight, he looked younger and more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "You're supposed to be resting," he said without looking up, as if he'd sensed her approach. "So are you." She settled beside him on the step, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, but not quite touching. "Is I a bad dream?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Car accident. Always the same one. I see it happening, but I can't stop it." Janka pulled her robe tighter around herself, feeling the night air carry the scent of grapevines and earth. "Do you want to talk about it?" Not particularly, but he didn't get up and go inside, didn't shut down the conversation the way she expected. "What about you? Why are you awake? Baby's moving more at night. It's strange, like having a secret only I know about." She placed her hand on her stomach, where a gentle flutter responded to her touch. "Sometimes I forget this is temporary, that in a few months I'll hand this baby over and go back to my regular life. Will you?" The question came out quiet, almost hesitant. "That's the arrangement. I know what the arrangement says." Cristiano turned to look at her, and in the moonlight, his grey eyes seemed almost silver. "But what do you want?" The question hung between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. What did she want? For 8 years, wanting had been a luxury she couldn't afford. Wanting meant hoping, and hoping meant disappointment, and disappointment meant the kind of pain that could knock you flat for months. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've spent so long not letting myself want things that I've forgotten how. I remember what that's like." His voice carried the weight of experience. "After the accident, I stopped wanting anything except for the pain to stop. It was safer that way." "What changed?" He looked out at the vineyard, where moonlight painted the grapevines silver. "You did. This did." He gestured vaguely toward her stomach. "Suddenly, I was invested in something again, and it terrified me." The admission hit her like a physical blow, not because it was unexpected, but because it voiced something she'd been feeling but couldn't name. This growing sense that what was happening between them was bigger than a business arrangement, more complicated than simple proximity. "Cristiano," she started, then stopped, not sure how to finish. "I know," he said quietly. "I know this wasn't supposed to happen. I know we agreed to keep things professional, but somewhere along the way, professional became personal, and personal became dangerous," she finished. "Yeah." They sat in silence, the weight of unspoken feelings settling around them like fog. In the distance, an owl called, and somewhere in the vineyard, small creatures rustled through the leaves, carrying on with their lives, while 2 humans tried to figure out how theirs had become so tangled together. "I think about you all the time," Cristiano said suddenly, the words rushing out like he'd been holding them back for weeks. "How you pull on your braids when you're thinking, how you hum while you cook, how you get that line between your eyebrows when you're trying not to let me see that you need help." Janka felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Cristiano, I think about what it would be like if this were real, if you were staying because you wanted to, not because Dr. Santos said you had to. If this baby were ours, not just mine." The word ours hung in the air between them, carrying all the weight of possibilities they'd both been trying not to acknowledge. "But it's not real," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and wanting it to be real is just going to hurt both of us. I know that." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his expression made her breath catch. But I can't seem to stop myself from wanting it anyway." Without thinking, she reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that felt both natural and earth-shattering. His skin was warm, calloused from work, and she could feel his pulse beating against her thumb. "I'm scared," she admitted. I've been alone for so long that I don't know how to be part of something. And this baby, what happens when the baby comes? What happens to us? I don't know. He squeezed her hand gently. But maybe we don't have to figure it all out tonight. Maybe not, she agreed. They sat holding hands in the moonlight, two people who'd found each other in the space between grief and hope, contract and connection. The baby moved again, a stronger flutter this time, and Janka gasped softly. What? Cristiano asked, concern immediately replacing the softness in his voice. The baby, it's here. She guided his free hand to her stomach, pressing his palm against the spot where she'd felt the movement. They waited, barely breathing, and then it happened again, a gentle push against his hand, like the baby was saying hello. Cristiano's eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink away. That's incredible. The first time you felt it move, Janka said softly. The first time anyone has, he corrected. You're the only one who's been there for all of this. The weight of that truth settled between them. She was the one who'd been there for the morning sickness, the doctor's appointments, the midnight worries. She was the one carrying this piece of his heart, literally and figuratively. I should go back to bed, she said, but neither of them moved, probably. But his hand stayed on her stomach, and hers stayed in his. Now this is going to complicate everything, she whispered. Everything's already complicated, he said, but maybe that's not such a bad thing. As they finally stood to go their separate ways, Janka realized that tonight had changed something fundamental between them. They'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross, acknowledged feelings they couldn't take back. And as she walked back to the guest house with the memory of his hand on her stomach and the warmth of his confession still echoing in her ears, she knew that whatever happened next, she was no longer just carrying his baby, she was carrying his heart. And somehow he'd ended up with hers. The contractions started at 4 in the morning, sharp and unmistakable, 12 weeks before they were supposed to. Janka woke with a gasp that turned into a cry of pain, her hands instinctively moving to her 28-week belly as her body cramped with frightening intensity. This wasn't the gentle Braxton Hicks contractions Dr. Santos had warned her about. This was something else entirely. No, 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 she whispered to the empty guest house, panic rising in her throat as another contraction gripped her. Not yet. Please, not yet. Through the haze of pain and fear, she managed to reach for her phone, fingers shaking as she scrolled to Cristiano's number. The phone rang once before his voice answered, instantly alert despite the early hour. Janka, what's wrong? Something's happening, she managed between contractions. The baby, I think... She didn't need to finish. Through the window, she could see lights flicking on in the main house, and within minutes, Cristiano was at her door, still pulling on a shirt over his jeans, his hair disheveled, but his eyes sharp with focus. How far apart? He asked, moving to her side with the calm efficiency of someone who'd been through this before. Every 3 minutes, she gasped. Cristiano, it's too early. The baby can't come now. We're going to the hospital. His voice stayed steady, but she could see the fear in his grey eyes, the memory of another emergency that had ended in loss. Can you walk? The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of pain and sirens. Cristiano had called 911, and the paramedics met them halfway, transferring Janka to the ambulance while he followed behind. She kept her eyes fixed on his truck in the side mirror, drawing strength from his presence even as terror threatened to overwhelm her. We need to stop this, she heard Dr. Santos saying as they wheeled her into the emergency room. Get her on magnesium sulfate, start an IV, and call the NICU team. The next hours passed in a haze of medical procedures and mounting fear. Janka found herself in a hospital bed, connected to monitors that beeped with the baby's heartbeat, strong but too fast, distressed by whatever was happening in her body. The medication is helping, Dr. Santos explained, her usually calm demeanor showing cracks of concern. We've slowed the contractions, but not stopped them completely. You're not dilating, which is good, but the baby is showing signs of stress. What does that mean? Cristiano asked from the chair beside her bed. He'd been there since they arrived, holding her hand through each contraction, his presence the only thing keeping her anchored to hope. It means we wait, and we watch, very carefully. Dr. Santos checked the monitors again. Janka, you're going to be here for a while. Strict bed rest, constant monitoring. If the contractions stop and stay stopped for 48 hours, we can consider sending you home. But if they continue, she didn't need to finish. If they continued, the baby would come too early, too small, too fragile, just like Cristiano's son had. I want to stay, Cristiano said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. Not just during visiting hours. I want to be here. Dr. Santos looked between them with her perceptive eyes, seeing something that went deeper than their original arrangement. Are you the father? The question hung in the room like a challenge. Legally, biologically, yes, Cristiano was the father. But the way Dr. Santos asked it, the way she looked at them holding hands with Janka's head on his shoulder, suggested she was asking about something more fundamental. Yes, Cristiano said simply. So then you can stay. As evening fell, Janka lay in the hospital bed watching the monitors trace her baby's heartbeat in green lines across the screen. The contractions had slowed but not stopped, a constant reminder that everything she'd begun to hope for hung in the balance. You should go home, she told Cristiano, though the thought of being alone made her chest tighten with panic. Get some real sleep. I'm not leaving. His voice carried a finality that brooked no argument. I already lost one family in a hospital. I'm not losing another. The word family hit her like a physical blow, not because it was unexpected, but because of how desperately she wanted it to be true. Cristiano? She started, but he shook his head. No, let me say this. I know what our arrangement was supposed to be. I know you were supposed to carry this baby and then walk away, but that's not what this is anymore, and we both know it. He leaned forward, his grey eyes intense in the harsh hospital lighting. I'm in love with you, Janka. Not just grateful, not just attracted to you, but completely, terrifyingly in love with you. Tears she'd been holding back for hours finally spilled over. You can't say that. Not now. Not like this. What if the baby is going to be fine, he said fiercely. And when it is, when we get through this, I want you to know that I don't want you to leave. I want you to stay, not because of the baby, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know how to be someone's family. What if I mess it up? What if I run when things get hard? Then I'll come find you, he said simply. And I'll keep finding you until you believe that you're not alone anymore. The monitors around them continued their electronic symphony, but all Janka could hear was the sound of her own heart breaking open. Not with loss, but with the terrifying possibility of love. I love you too, she whispered, the words feeling both natural and revolutionary. I've been trying not to, but I do. I love you and I love this baby, and I'm scared that wanting something this much means I'm going to lose it. Cristiano moved from his chair to sit on the edge of her bed, careful not to disturb the wires and monitors. You're not going to lose us, he said, brushing tears from her cheeks with gentle fingers. We're going to get through this together. Promise me, she said, gripping his hand. Promise me that if something happens to the baby, it won't change this. That you won't look at me and see failure. I promise, he said without hesitation. And I need you to promise me something too. What? Promise me you'll stop running. Promise me you'll stay and fight for this, for us, even when it gets scary. Outside the hospital window, dawn was breaking over Napa Valley, painting the sky in shades of hope and promise. Somewhere in the distance, life was going on, people waking up, making coffee, starting their ordinary days. But here, in this room filled with monitors and medical equipment, and the weight of everything they'd finally admitted, nothing would ever be ordinary again. I promise, Janka whispered, and as Cristiano leaned down to kiss her forehead, as the baby's heartbeat continued its steady rhythm on the monitor, she realized that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was exactly what your heart needed most. Sometimes you had to stop running and start believing that you deserved to be caught. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other but would change everything, Janka's water broke while she was folding baby clothes. She'd been on modified bed rest since the hospital scare, spending her days in the main house where Cristiano could keep an eye on her. The guest house had become storage for baby supplies, a crib they'd assembled together, tiny clothes in soft colors, blankets that smelled like hope and possibility. Cristiano, she called calmly from the living room, where she stood in a puddle of amniotic fluid, holding an impossibly small yellow onesie. It's time. He appeared in the doorway, dish towel still in his hands, and took in the scene with the practiced calm that had gotten them through 6 weeks of uncertainty. How do you feel? He asked, already reaching for the hospital bag they'd kept packed by the door. Ready? She said, and meant it. After weeks of fear and waiting, after midnight conversations about names and futures and what their family would look like, she was finally ready to meet the baby who'd brought them together. The drive to the hospital was different this time. No sirens, no panic, just the quiet anticipation of something long-awaited finally arriving. Janka's contractions were strong but manageable, and between them, she found herself studying Cristiano's profile as he drove. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, catching her watching him. "How different everything is from that first day at the diner." She shifted in her seat as another contraction built. "I thought I was just agreeing to carry a baby for 9 months, and instead you got stuck with me," he said with a small smile. "I wouldn't call it stuck." She reached for his hand as they pulled into the hospital parking lot. "I'd call it found." Doctor Santos was waiting for them in the delivery room, her calm presence immediately soothing Janka's nerves. The next several hours passed in a blur of contractions and coaching, of Cristiano holding her hand and whispering encouragements, of the overwhelming intensity of bringing life into the world. "I can see the head," Dr. Santos announced. "One more push, Janka." With Cristiano's hand in hers and her own determination fueling her, Janka pushed with everything she had left. And then, suddenly, the room filled with the sound she'd been waiting 8 months to hear, a baby's first cry, strong and indignant and absolutely perfect. "It's a girl," Dr. Santos said, her voice thick with emotion as she placed the baby on Janka's chest. A beautiful, healthy girl. Janka looked down at the tiny face scrunched against her chest, dark hair, skin still red from the effort of being born, eyes squeezed shut against the bright world she'd just entered. She was perfect in a way that made everything else fade away. "She's so small," Cristiano whispered, his voice rough with tears. "She's perfect," Janka corrected, running a gentle finger over the baby's impossibly soft cheek. Dr. Santos worked quietly around them, handling the medical necessities while allowing them this first precious moment as a family, because that's what they were now, Janka realized. Not a business arrangement, not a temporary situation, but a family born from grief and hope and the kind of love that surprised you when you least expected it. "What's her name?" Dr. Santos asked softly. Janka looked at Cristiano, seeing her own overwhelming emotion reflected in his grey eyes. They'd discussed names during the long weeks of bed rest, but somehow none of them had felt right until now. "Hope," Cristiano said suddenly, the name coming out like a prayer. "Her name is Hope." "Hope Ellis Moore," Janka added, including her own surname without thinking about it, making the baby theirs in a way that went beyond paperwork. "Hope Ellis Moore," Dr. Santos repeated, making a note in her chart. That's a strong name for a strong little girl. Later, after Hope had been cleaned and measured and declared perfectly healthy, after the nurses had given them privacy and visiting hours had ended, Janka and Cristiano sat together in the quiet hospital room, taking turns holding their daughter. "I need to tell you something," Janka said as she watched Cristiano cradle Hope with the careful reverence of someone who understood how precious life could be. He looked up, concern flickering across his face. "The contract," she continued, "I know what it says about after the birth, about me leaving." Cristiano went very still. "Janka, I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "I know we'll need to figure out the legal stuff, make it official somehow, but I'm not walking away from this. From her. From you." Relief flooded his expression, followed by something that looked like pure joy. "Are you sure? Because once you decide to stay, I'm not letting you change your mind." "I'm sure." She reached for his free hand, intertwining their fingers in the gesture that had become natural to them. "I spent 8 years running from everything that mattered, because I was afraid of getting hurt. But you know what I realized?" "What?" "Getting hurt is worth it if it means getting to love someone. And I love you, Cristiano Moore. I love you and I love our daughter, and I want to build something real with you." He leaned over to kiss her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, careful not to wake the baby sleeping peacefully in his arms. "I love you too," he whispered against her lips. "Both of you, more than I ever thought I could love anything again." Outside the hospital window, the sun was setting over Napa Valley, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in the distance, life was going on as usual, but here in this room everything had changed. A baby had been born, a family had been created, and 2 people who'd thought they were too broken to love again had discovered that sometimes the best things grow from the cracks. "What happens now?" Janka asked, looking down at Hope's sleeping face. "Now we go home," Cristiano said simply. "But we take our daughter home, and we figure out how to be a family." "I like the sound of that," Janka said, and as Hope stirred in her father's arms, making the soft sounds that newborns make when they're dreaming, Janka thought about all the roads that had led her here, all the losses and fears and temporary homes that had somehow brought her to this moment. This man, this perfect little girl who would never doubt that she was wanted, loved, and home. Sometimes, she realized, the best destinations were the ones you never planned to reach, and sometimes the most beautiful love stories were the ones that began with a contract and ended with forever. 2 years later, the sound of bare feet running across hardwood floors woke Janka before the sun did. She opened her eyes to find Hope standing beside the bed, her dark curls still messy from sleep, clutching the worn stuffed elephant that had become her constant companion. At 2 years old, Hope had inherited her father's grey eyes and her mother's stubborn independence, along with a smile that could melt the hardest heart. "Mama, up!" Hope demanded, reaching chubby arms toward the bed. "It's still early, baby girl," Janka whispered, but she was already lifting Hope onto the mattress, settling her between herself and Cristiano, who was just beginning to stir. "Tiny too early," Cristiano mumbled into his pillow, but his arm automatically came around both of them, pulling his girls closer. This had become their morning ritual, Hope climbing into bed before dawn, the three of them stealing a few more minutes of warmth and togetherness before the day demanded their attention. The bed that had once felt too big for one lonely man now perfectly fit a family. Through the bedroom window, Janka could see the vineyard stretching toward the hills, the grapevines heavy with fruit ready for harvest. It was their third harvest together, and she still felt a thrill of ownership when she looked out at the land that had become home in ways she'd never imagined possible. "Dada, coffee," Hope announced, patting Cristiano's cheek with the imperious authority of a toddler who knew she was adored. "Coffee for the princess coming up," Cristiano said, sitting up and running a hand through his hair. He looked different now. The lines around his eyes came from laughter instead of grief, and the careful distance he'd once maintained had been replaced by the easy affection of a man who'd learned to trust happiness again. Downstairs, the kitchen filled with the familiar sounds of their morning routine, Hope sat in her high chair, chattering to her stuffed elephant while Cristiano made coffee and Janka prepared breakfast. The guest house had been converted into Cristiano's workshop years ago, its original purpose served and transformed into something new. "Dr. Santos called yesterday," Janka mentioned as she flipped pancakes. "Sanchi wants to schedule Hope's checkup for next week. Everything okay?" Cristiano's voice carried the slight edge it always held when discussing anything medical, a father's protective instinct honed by experience. "Everything's perfect," Janka assured him. "She just wants to see how tall our little giant has gotten." Hope had indeed grown tall for her age, with sturdy legs that carried her everywhere at a run and a vocabulary that impressed everyone who met her. She was healthy, curious and completely unaware that she'd been the catalyst for a love story that had saved 2 broken hearts. "Speaking of Dr. Santos," Cristiano said, pouring coffee into 2 mugs and orange juice into Hope's sippy cup, "she mentioned something interesting at the farmer's market last weekend." "Oh," Janka raised an eyebrow, recognizing his tone. "She said she's been thinking about retiring, moving closer to her daughter in San Diego." He paused, studying Janka's face. "But she also said she'd been hoping to find the right couple to take over her practice, people who understand what it means to fight for family." Janka nearly dropped the spatula. "Cristiano, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm saying that you've learned more about high-risk pregnancies in the past 2 years than most people learn in medical school. I'm saying you have a gift for making people feel safe when they're scared, and I'm saying that if you wanted to go back to school, become a nurse practitioner or midwife," he shrugged, "we could make it work." The idea hit her like lightning, unexpected, illuminating, and suddenly making everything clear. She thought about all the women she'd met in Dr. Santos's waiting room over the years, all the couples facing the same fears she and Cristiano had once navigated. She thought about her own hands learning to comfort, her own voice learning to soothe, her own heart learning that sometimes the most meaningful work came from sharing your scars. You'd really support that, the schooling, the time away, all of it. "Janka." Cristiano set down his coffee mug and moved to stand behind her, his arms circling her waist as she leaned back against his chest. "I'd support you in anything that makes you happy." "We both would." "Both?" she asked, laughing as Hope clapped her hands and shouted, "Mama School," as if she'd been following the entire conversation. "She's already planning to be your first patient," Cristiano said, pressing a kiss to the side of Janka's neck. "Aren't you, huh, Hope?" "Mama help babies," Hope declared with the certainty of someone who'd clearly overheard more adult conversations than they'd realized. Later that morning, after breakfast and after Hope had been dressed and entertained, Yanka found herself walking through the vineyard alone. It was something she did when she needed to think, to process, to remember how far she'd traveled from the woman who'd stepped off a Greyhound bus 3 years ago with everything she owned in 2 duffel bags. The woman who'd been running from attachment, from hope, from the possibility of building something permanent. The woman who'd thought love was a luxury she couldn't afford. Now, as she walked between rows of grapevines heavy with fruit, she could hear Hope's laughter floating from the main house, where Cristiano was probably building elaborate block towers for her to knock down. She could smell the bread she'd put in the oven before her walk, could see the laundry hanging on the line, domestic details that had once felt foreign and now felt like home. Her phone buzzed with a text from her former client, a small business owner whose books she still handled remotely. "Hope you and the family are well. Still the best accountant I've ever worked with, even part-time." She smiled, typing back, "We're wonderful. Talk soon." Part-time work, full-time mother, potential student. Her life had become beautifully complicated in ways she'd never anticipated. And at the center of it all was a love that had grown slowly, carefully, from the space between grief and hope. "There you are." She turned to find Cristiano walking toward her, Hope on his shoulders, both of them grinning like they'd just shared a secret. "We come find Mama," Hope announced, as if this had been a great adventure rather than a walk across their own backyard. "You found me," Yanka said, reaching up to tickle Hope's dangling feet, earning a squeal of delight. "We were thinking," Cristiano said, settling Hope on the ground where she immediately began collecting interesting rocks. "Maybe it's time for a family trip." "Oh, where did you have in mind?" "Montgomery." The word hit her like a gentle blow, carrying all the weight of a past she'd spent years running from. Montgomery, Alabama, home of magnolia trees and childhood memories, her parents' graves and her grandmother's house that probably still sat empty, waiting. "I know it's been hard to think about going back," Cristiano continued quietly, "but Hope should know where she comes from, both sides of her story." Yanka felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming gratitude of being known so completely. He understood that her reluctance to visit Alabama wasn't about forgetting her past, but about being strong enough to face it. "You think I'm ready?" she asked. "I think you've been ready for a while. You just needed to realize it." Hope had wandered a few feet away, chattering to herself as she examined a particularly interesting grapevine. In the afternoon light, with her dark curls catching the sun and her small hands gentle with the leaves, she looked like a perfect blend of both her parents, Cristiano's thoughtfulness, Yanka's determination, and something entirely her own. "Look, Mama," Hope called, holding up a cluster of grapes that had grown within her reach. "Pretty, very pretty, baby girl," Yanka called back. "Just like you. We could visit your parents' graves," Cristiano said softly. "Let Hope meet her grandparents, even if it's just in story and memory." The idea of standing at her parents' graveside with her own family, of telling Hope about the grandparents who would have adored her, felt both healing and right. For years, she'd carried her grief alone. Now she could share it, let it become part of their family story, instead of a secret burden. "I'd like that," she said. "So I think it's time." That evening, after Hope had been bathed and read to and tucked into her crib with her elephant, Yanka and Cristiano sat on their front porch, watching the sun set over the vineyard. The guest house stood empty now, but sometimes Yanka still looked at it and remembered the woman who'd first walked through its door, scared, alone, convinced that attachment was dangerous. "Do you ever miss it?" Cristiano asked, following her gaze. "Gather freedom of not being tied down." Yanka considered the question seriously. Did she miss the ability to pack everything she owned and disappear? Did she miss the simplicity of having no one to worry about but herself? "No," she said finally. "I don't miss being free. I was never free. I was just scared. There's a difference. And now? Now I'm brave enough to stay, brave enough to build something, brave enough to let people love me and to love them back, even though it's terrifying." Cristiano reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers in the gesture that had become their signature. "I'm proud of you, for everything you've become, everything you've built." "We've built," she corrected. "None of this would exist without you." "I think you're wrong about that," he said thoughtfully. "You would have found your way eventually. You're stronger than you know, maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to find it alone." Inside the house, Hope's baby monitor crackled softly with the sounds of a child settling into sleep, little sighs and the rustle of blankets and the occasional soft word spoken to her elephant. Soon there would be quiet, and Janka and Cristiano would go inside to their own bed, to their own dreams, to the life they'd built one careful day at a time. "Sire Cristiano," she said as they stood to go inside. "Yeah, I want to tell you something I've never told you before." He paused, concern flickering across his face. "What is it?" "The day I met you at the diner, I almost walked away. I sat in that booth for 10 minutes before you arrived, and I almost left. I was so scared of getting attached to anything, even a business arrangement." "What stopped you?" Janka smiled, remembering that moment of decision that had changed everything. "Hope. Not our hope, but the idea of hope. I realized I was tired of running from possibility. I'm glad you stayed." "Me too." She stood on her tiptoes to kiss him, soft and sweet and full of all the tomorrows they were still planning together. "Me too." Years later, when Hope was old enough to ask about how her parents met, they would tell her about contracts and coincidences, about grapes and guest houses, about two people who were brave enough to let love grow in the space between what they expected and what they found. They would tell her about choosing each other, every day, in the small moments and the big ones. They would tell her that love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone worth fighting for. And they would tell her that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that begin with business and end with family, that start with fear and end with home. But for now, as they walked hand in hand into the house where their daughter slept peacefully, where the kitchen still smelled like the bread they'd baked together, where the walls held photographs of a family that grew from hope itself, Janka simply felt grateful. Grateful for the bus ticket that had brought her here. Grateful for the contract that had become a promise. Grateful for the man who'd taught her that home wasn't a place. It was a choice you made every day to stay and fight and love, and build something beautiful from the ashes of what came before. Outside, the vineyard settled into evening quiet, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of life continuing. Owls calling, wind through leaves, the eternal rhythm of a world that kept turning, kept growing, kept offering second chances to those brave enough to take them. And in a house filled with love and laughter and the sweet dreams of a little girl named Hope, a family slept peacefully, knowing that tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, and new opportunities to choose each other all over again. It was, Janka thought as sleep claimed her, exactly the kind of love story she'd always hoped was possible, but had never dared to believe she deserved, until now. Karastitia, what did you learn from this story? Have you ever found love in the most unexpected place? Would you have made the same choice as Janka? Your participation in our channel is very important to us. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.